Back in September 2019, I was doing a regional sales trip and booked an Airbnb room in this small town called Springfield. For the first night, I was 35 then, working as a B2B sales manager, living out of my car half the month. So staying in strangers' houses didn't really bother me anymore. I got there late on a Monday, close to 11. The host had said she'd be out and left the key under the mat. The place was an old Victorian cut up into separate rooms for rent. My room was on the first floor, 2 big windows facing the little parking area where guests left their cars. Inside, it looked fine. Clean enough, generic furniture, nothing creepy. I locked the door, checked it twice like I always do on the road, and started unpacking my suitcase so my blouses wouldn't be destroyed by morning. I kept the curtains half open so I could glance at my car. Around midnight, I was standing by the bed, sorting samples and planning the next day's route on my laptop, when I caught movement by the window in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just my reflection, but it didn't line up. Someone was standing outside close to the glass, looking in. My whole body just kind of locked up for a second. Then I snapped the light off, and the room went dim. Lit only by the parking lot, I moved to the side of the window and nudged the curtain with 2 fingers. A man in a dark jacket was turned toward my room. No phone in his hand, no cigarette, just standing there like he was watching TV. The second I really focused on him, he moved. He turned away and walked fast toward a gray van parked in the far corner. No logo, older model, beat-up rear door. He climbed in on the passenger side first, then slid over. The van started, but he didn't leave. He just sat there with the engine running. I didn't go outside or try to confront him. I'm not 22 and fearless anymore. I texted my best friend, told her some guy had been looking in my window, and stayed away from the glass. For a while I watched the lot from the side of the curtain, heart racing every time a light moved. At some point the van's headlights went dark, but I could still see its outline. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because my alarm dragged me out of a stiff half-sleep around 6:30. In the morning, with sunlight and other cars around, it was easy to pretend I'd overreacted. The van was gone. I checked the back seat of my car, locked the doors, and told myself it was probably just another guest walking around or the owner's boyfriend or something. I still felt relieved when I pulled away and didn't see that gray shape in my mirror. My route that week was pretty standard. A few towns in a line, client offices, 2 long days, then home. Tuesday morning and early afternoon were completely normal. I drove, listened to emails over Bluetooth, hit 2 meetings, stopped for gas and terrible coffee. Nothing weird. Around 3 p.m., I pulled into one of those roadside diners off the highway for a late lunch. The lot was half full of pickups and sedans. I parked, stepped out, and there it was. A gray van near the exit. Same general look, same age, same dull paint. My stomach did this quick drop. Then I argued with myself in my head. There are tons of gray vans. It's a common color. Don't be dramatic. I still walked the long way around my car to stretch my legs so I could look at it without staring. The rear bumper had a noticeable scratch running across it. I remembered the dented rear door from the Airbnb, and it looked too close for comfort. I stood there long enough to feel stupid. Nobody wants to be the weird woman glaring at a random vehicle, so I forced myself inside, sat by the window, and watched while I ate. No one got in or out of the van the entire time I was there. By Tuesday evening, I reached the second town on my route and checked into a regular chain hotel right off the main road, the kind with the same bedding in every state. After dropping my bags, I realized I didn't have any water or snacks for the next day, so I drove to the nearest big box store a few minutes away. The parking lot was bright, busy, normal weekday evening stuff. I stepped out of my car, looked across the rows, and felt that same cold drop in my chest. Parked a couple rows over, angled toward the entrance, was the same gray van. Same scratched bumper, same dented door. This time I could see two people sitting in the front seats. The driver had his hands on the wheel. The passenger looked straight toward the store. I didn't stand there and stare. I walked straight inside, pretending I hadn't even noticed them, and grabbed a basket. While I picked up water and some junk food, I kept replaying it in my head. Airbnb lot, roadside diner, now here. Different towns, same van. At least one guy I'd already seen watching me through a window. I hadn't memorized the plate the first night, but I checked it now and repeated the numbers in my head until they stuck. When I came back out, they were already pulling away, turning out of the lot without stopping anywhere. I watched their taillights disappear, then got in my car and locked the doors. I immediately called my friend on speaker and told her everything. She listened and finally said I was probably being paranoid, but still, share your location with me and stop parking in dark corners, okay? I shared my location, promised I would, and tried to push it out of my mind. On Wednesday, I had my last meeting at a client's office, about an hour from the hotel, and then I was supposed to drive straight home. The meeting ran late. Procurement dragged it out until almost 7 p.m. By the time I walked out of the lobby, it was fully dark. Most people had already left. Only a few lights were on in the building, and the parking lot had those tall lamps that leave big dead spots between them. I'd grabbed a spot in one of the farther rows that afternoon because everything near the entrance had been taken. Now, it felt stupid. I slung my laptop bag across my body, keys in my hand, and started walking, trying not to look as tense as I felt. The lot was mostly quiet except for distant traffic. I was maybe halfway to my car when I heard a door slam from the side of the building, quick and loud. Headlights snapped on and swung across the asphalt. A gray van shot out from a side lane and turned into my row, moving faster than anyone should in a parking lot. It rolled up and stopped at an angle that almost blocked me in between two parked cars. The passenger door flew open before the van even fully stopped, and a man jumped out from the passenger side, the same one who'd been looking in my window at the Airbnb room. I didn't think. I spun around and ran back toward the building as hard as I could, screaming for help and waving my arms. I heard his shoes on the asphalt for a few steps, and then the van's engine roared. Someone yelled near the entrance. One of the lobby doors flew open and a security guard rushed out, hand on his belt. More lights flicked on around the lot. The driver must have seen he'd lost his moment, because the van jerked backward, and the guy dove through the passenger door before it peeled away toward the exit. Fast, I kept running until I reached the guard and grabbed his arm. I was shaking so hard I could barely talk, just saying, "That gray van has been following me." Over and over. He walked me inside while still watching the driveway. On the way, he asked if I knew them, if they had said anything. If I'd seen them before tonight, I told him about the Airbnb window, the diner, the hotel, the store, all in the wrong order. He called his supervisor and then 911. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled in and one stopped near us inside. In a conference room off the lobby, they took my statement and then the guards. He told them he had clearly seen 2 men in the front of the van when it pulled away, both in dark jackets, both trying not to look toward the building. I gave the make, the color, the scratch on the rear bumper, but the plate number kept slipping when I tried to say it. One officer wrote everything down, while the other drove around the streets looking for it. After a while, he radioed back that there was no sign of the van anywhere. After they finished the paperwork, the officers walked me out to my car and watched me drive off the lot. I went straight back to the hotel, locked the door, and sat on the bed staring at my keys like they were going to protect me. What scared me most, once my hands stopped shaking, was realizing these guys had tracked me for 2 days, through different towns, and waited until I was alone in a dark row. If that meeting hadn't run late, if I'd come out with everyone else, I don't know if they would have tried anything. The next morning, I went to the station to meet with a detective. By then, they had already pulled my credit card records and confirmed I'd been at the Airbnb The diner, the hotel, the store, exactly when I said I was. They had grabbed security footage from the hotel, and the store too. In every clip where the gray van showed up, the plate area was coated in mud, so thick you couldn't read a single character. The detective said that wasn't normal road grime, that it looked like someone had smeared it on there on purpose at all. He was blunt with me. He said following someone across multiple towns like that usually meant either a trafficking crew looking for a low-risk grab or someone with serious mental issues who had fixated on me. He mentioned a few similar gray van reports in nearby towns, but nothing solid they could connect mine to. I took a week off work because I couldn't focus, kept seeing gray vans everywhere. Now I only book hotels, park under lights near doors, share my location, and watch my mirrors, not knowing if they meant to grab me or do something worse. I rented a small photo studio on the first floor of an old office building in an industrial district where rent was significantly lower than downtown 3 floors. Built back in the 70s, narrow corridors, worn carpet, a mix of tiny companies from accountants to design studios. I'm 29, mostly shooting product stuff and portfolios, and that studio was the first time it felt like I had a real place instead of dragging gear through people's living rooms. Most days I kept normal hours. I liked locking up while it was still light, grabbing cheap food, finishing edits at home. Sometimes though, if there was a rush job or a picky client, I stayed late. The later it got, the emptier the building felt. Around 7, doors slammed, alarms beeped, cars rolled out of the lot. By 9, it was usually just me, and, on weekdays, the cleaning crew somewhere on another floor. About a year ago in spring, I got an urgent order from a small online jewelry shop. They needed a whole collection shot fast for their site. The owner could only come after her office job, around 9 at night. The money covered most of my rent, so saying no wasn't even a thought. One late evening in exchange for not stressing over bills was an easy trade. She showed up with boxes of rings, chains, tiny earrings that tried to escape every time we opened the lid. We worked non-stop. I adjusted each piece under the soft boxes, checked focus on the monitor. She hovered behind me, worrying about reflections and dust. It was that kind of repetitive work where time just disappears into the next shot. When we finally finished, my shoulders were stiff and my eyes felt sanded. I glanced at the corner of my screen and actually double-checked it. It was almost midnight. She carefully packed everything back into foam, counted the pieces twice, thanked me a few more times, and hurried off down the corridor. Her footsteps faded toward the exit, then the motion sensor light clicked off behind her. After that, the whole floor went dead. On weekends, we had no security guard on the first floor. There were cameras at the main entrance and outside, but nobody actually sitting there watching them. The other tenants had cleared out hours earlier. Through the thin walls, I heard nothing. No printers, no voices, just the low fan of my computer. I saved the last batch of files, backed them up to my external drive, and started breaking down the set. Soft boxes first, then stands, then lenses back into the case. I was already thinking about food and a shower. That's when I heard the sound. It came from underneath, from the direction of the basement. A metallic clang, sharp and heavy, like someone dropped a wrench on bare concrete or shoved a metal shelf hard against a wall. It was clear enough that I froze mid-movement and just listened. Nothing followed. No voices, no footsteps, no dragging. Just silence again. Our building had a common basement that ran under the whole first floor. Old furniture, boxes, archives, everything no one wanted upstairs ended up down there. Access was through a square hatch in the corridor with a concrete stairway. When I signed the lease, The manager told me the hatch stayed locked with a padlock, and only she and the cleaning company had keys. I'd never once seen it open. I told myself it was probably cleaning or maintenance, even though I hadn't heard any vacuum or carts, and it was nearly midnight on a weekend. Still, the hairs on my arms were up for no good reason. I finished packing the last light stand, shut down the computer, grabbed my bag and camera, and stepped into the hallway to check before heading out. The motion light flicked on after a short delay. The corridor looked normal except for one thing. At the far end, by the turn toward the entrance, the square outline of the basement hatch didn't look flat against the floor. From where I was, it seemed slightly raised. I walked down the hall slower than I usually would, trying to look like I was just leaving. Up close, I saw the padlock that usually hung through the metal loop was off to the side, dangling open from a small hook in the wall. The hatch lid itself was cracked open a few inches. From the gap came a thin strip of light from below, not bright like ceiling lamps, more like the uneven glow of a phone flashlight. Someone was down there. I stopped just short of the opening and leaned forward a little, keeping my feet planted back. A cold, dusty smell drifted up. I cleared my throat and called, "Hello? Is someone there? Maintenance? Cleaner?" For a couple of seconds I heard only a faint rustle. Fabric against concrete, maybe. Then a man's voice answered, but it was so muffled I couldn't catch a word. It didn't sound drunk, just wrong, like his mouth was covered or turned into a corner. "Sorry, what?" I raised my voice a bit, but not enough to echo. A stupid part of me was still worried about bothering whoever might be left upstairs, even though I knew there was probably no one. The next reply was closer and clearer, like he'd stepped right up to the bottom of the stairs and faced the opening. "Come down, I need help, can't get out." The way he said it hit that reflex in me that wants to help first and think later. It sounded like a real person in real trouble. But another part of my brain dug in hard. If he could stand there, talk clearly, and get to the stairs, why couldn't he climb them himself? Looking back, that was the exact second when something in my gut finally overruled that automatic urge to move, and I just stood there with one hand on the wall, staring at that narrow strip of light, not moving an inch. I stayed there a few more seconds, listening and trying to convince myself I'd misheard him. I asked again, louder, what happened and who was down there with him. My voice sounded too loud in the empty hallway, and then it was just my breathing and that strip of light. Instead of an answer, I heard footsteps on concrete, slow and even, moving away from the stairs and then back again. No, I'm hurt. No, I'm stuck. Nothing at all. Just soles scraping and that hollow echo from the basement. Said I could call the manager, but he stayed silent. That was when I realized I was standing almost right over the opening, basically outlined against the light above it. Whoever was down there could probably see exactly how close I was. I took 2 slow steps back, pulled out my phone, and started scrolling for the manager's number again. Before I could tap it, the same voice came from the hatch, closer this time. "Come on, get down already. I've been waiting here a long time." Now there was no strain in it, no fear, just irritation, like I was the one wasting his time. Something finally clicked inside. I stepped forward without thinking, grabbed the hatch handle, and slammed the lid shut as hard as I could. The bang went down the hallway, and I waited, but nothing came. My hands shook as I shoved the padlock through the loop and snapped it shut tight. I stepped back. Then I turned and walked fast back to my studio without looking toward the hatch again. I unlocked the door, slipped in, locked it, and dragged my heaviest equipment case in front of it. When the door was blocked, did I dial 911? My fingers slipped once on the screen. I told the dispatcher someone was in the basement who shouldn't be there, and the hatch lock was off. I said a man down there had tried to lure me down instead of asking me to call anyone. I added I was alone. It was midnight, and I was scared. She took the address, told me to stay where I was with the door locked, and said officers were on the way. She kept me on the line, checking every minute if I heard anything in the hallway. I didn't hear a thing. No footsteps, banging on the hatch, nothing. Around 10 minutes later, there was a knock and someone called police from the hallway. I checked the little frosted pane, saw the uniforms, pushed the case aside, opened the door, and let them in. 2 officers listened to my story, then went straight to the hatch. Flashlights were ready. They went down through the hatch with flashlights while I waited by my studio door. I heard their boots on the stairs, a few radio words, then a quick scuffle. After a couple of minutes, they came back up with a man in handcuffs between them. My heart pounded hard. The man they brought up looked about 45, filthy clothes, greasy hair, eyes moving non-stop. They sat him on the floor while officer went through the backpack they'd taken from him. Inside were a screwdriver, a piece of metal pipe, and a pile of laptops, tablets, phones, and other electronics. One officer said the guy was homeless, had crawled in through a broken vent, and had been living down there, coming at night to rob offices, and they saw it as more than theft. Later, I ended my lease and moved to a building with better security despite higher rent. Way back in 2021, my friend Emily and I rented a small 2-story house in the Denver suburbs. We were both 25 and stupidly happy to finally have a place that felt like ours and not just another student apartment. The house was pretty plain, but it was clean, cheap enough, and close to our jobs. The only odd thing was the attic. During the walkthrough, our landlord Walter pointed at the ceiling hatch on the 2nd floor and said it was better if we didn't go up there because the beams were old. There was a ton of dust, and the hatch lock was broken so you could accidentally lock yourself in. We didn't plan on storing anything up there anyway, so we just laughed and told him we'd leave it alone. For the first couple weeks, everything was normal. We worked, watched trash TV, argued about dishes, all that boring stuff. Then around week 3, Emily started pausing at night and saying, "Do you hear that?" At first, I didn't hear anything, so I shrugged it off and told her it was the house settling, or maybe a truck outside. A few nights later, I heard it too. Faint creaks, spaced out, like careful footsteps traveling from one side of the house to the other. Sometimes there was this low, dragging sound, like a chair being nudged an inch at a time. I kept telling both of us it had to be something normal, but I noticed Emily stopped going upstairs alone after dark. One evening, we were sitting at the little kitchen table eating leftovers and scrolling on our phones when we heard it. 3 solid bangs right above our heads, a pause, then 3 more. It was too clear and spaced out to be random. Emily froze with her fork halfway to her mouth and just stared at the ceiling. My stomach dropped, but I tried to sound calm and said, "Maybe something shifted up there, like an old box falling." We sat completely still for another minute. Nothing. No more creaks, no wind, just us breathing. I told Emily I'd at least look around the upstairs. I went up to the 2nd floor hallway where the attic hatch was. Usually the panel sat flush with the ceiling, but now I could see it had slid just a bit to one side, like someone had pushed it up and not pulled it back all the way. That bothered me more than the knocking. I grabbed a chair, climbed up, and reached my hand to the edge. Cool air was leaking around it. I didn't hear anything up there, but there was no way I was sticking my head through a dark hole above my face. Back downstairs, we called Walter on speaker so we'd both hear the same thing. I asked him if he'd been by or if any maintenance people had needed access to the attic. He sounded annoyed and said he hadn't been at the house in about a month and nobody should be going in there. While we were still on the call, Emily suddenly went, "Wait, what about Kevin? Kevin was the guy who lived across the street, late 20s, quiet, always watching people from his porch. When we first moved in, he'd walked over and helped me lift a box, then out of nowhere asked if we were planning to use the attic at all. At the time, it just felt like a weird, small-talk question. Remembering it with the moved hatch gave both of us a bad feeling. After we hung up with Walter, we talked through it logically. We didn't want to open that hatch and risk cornering some random person. At the same time, calling the cops with nothing but noises felt excessive. Emily had a little Wi-Fi camera from her last apartment, so we decided on that as a middle step. We taped it to the wall in the upstairs hallway, angled straight at the hatch, connected it to her phone and mine, and went to bed with our bedroom doors locked. For the next 2 days, the only clips were us walking back and forth getting ready for work. On the third day, while we were both at work, my phone buzzed with a motion alert around 3 p.m. I didn't see it until my break. I opened the app, hit play, and my hands started shaking. The video showed our empty hallway in daylight, then the attic hatch rising slowly from one side, like someone underneath was lifting it carefully. The panel slid aside, and a man in dark clothes and a hood climbed down, putting one foot on the doorframe, then the floor, like he'd practiced the move. He pushed the panel mostly back, not fully, and walked out of frame toward the stairs. I texted Emily, "Do not go in the house, call me." She called immediately, and I sent her the video. We both left work early. When I got home, I parked on the street and waited in the car until she pulled up so we could go through the footage together. Sitting there with the doors locked, we watched the rest of the clip. After coming down, he went straight to the kitchen, opened our fridge like it was his, pulled out a juice carton, and drank straight from it. Then he wandered into the dining area, flipped through a couple of magazines on the table, glanced around, and headed back upstairs. He reached up, grabbed the edge of the hatch, and disappeared into the attic again. You never saw his face, but the height, the build, the way he walked. It all looked exactly like Kevin. We called 911 from the car and told the dispatcher we had video of someone coming out of our attic. Officers showed up fast, and we played the recording for them before anyone went inside. 2 of them cleared the house, then pulled the hatch down and climbed up. When they came back down, they said there was an old mattress up there, some blankets, food wrappers, and a couple of water bottles. One officer stayed with us while the others went across the street. About 15 minutes later, they walked Kevin out of his house in handcuffs. He didn't yell, didn't argue, just kept his head down. Later, we heard that at the station, he admitted everything. That he'd crawled in through an external vent before we ever moved in. That he'd been sleeping on that old mattress whenever the place was empty, coming down to use the kitchen and wander around when tenants were gone. And that he honestly believed he had the right to live in that house because some distant relative of his once owned it. Walter came to the house that same evening after the police left, looking like he had aged overnight. He kept running his hand through his hair and repeating that he had no idea anyone was up there. He walked through every room with us, staring at the attic hatch like it might move again. When they told him about the mattress and trash, he looked sick. He said he bought the place cheap after it sat empty and never thought someone would crawl in through a vent and live above his tenants without him knowing. He said it was unforgivable. He immediately told us we could break the lease and move out without paying another cent. He even offered to help with moving costs, which I honestly believed was guilt more than anything. Emily and I didn't argue. That night we went online, found a short-term sublet across town, and started packing whatever we could fit in our cars. We slept there one last week with our bedroom doors locked and a chair under each knob. Even with Kevin in jail, every little noise in that house made both of us jump. We counted hours until we were gone. Before we left for good, the detectives came back to finish paperwork and return Emily's camera. One of them mentioned, almost like small talk, that Kevin already had a trespassing conviction in another state for staying in houses that weren't his same pattern. Empty places, crawl spaces, attics. Hearing that made my stomach turn. This wasn't some sudden breakdown. This was his habit. We handed over the keys at the end of the week and drove to the sublet. First thing I did there was check the attic, the closets, and the crawl space myself. Needed proof we were alone. In the sublet, Emily started having nightmares almost right away. She would text me at 3 in the morning saying she heard someone walking above her again. We knew there was no attic there, but she still made me come over one night to look at the ceiling and walls. During the day, we unpacked and went through our boxes, trying to see if anything from the old house seemed missing or disturbed. Nothing obvious was gone. The officers told us later that Kevin mostly stayed in the attic and only came down for food, water, and curiosity. Nothing else. When we got a copy of his written statement, the timeline hit us harder than anything. According to what he told them, he'd been in that attic almost 2 months before we even moved in, and then stayed while we lived there. He said he listened to us talking, arguing, laughing, moving around the kitchen, and tried to guess what kind of people we were. He admitted coming down many afternoons to eat, to shower once, and to just wander. 2 straight months of our lives happening underneath him like he was watching a show. We had no idea then. Even now, I still catch myself checking attics and crawl spaces in every new place. Even though I know the odds of this happening again are tiny, I tell myself it's just being careful. But really it's that video burned into my brain. The calm way he moved through our kitchen, drinking our juice and touching our things like he belonged there, scares me more than anything else. Whenever a ceiling creaks now, I don't just hear the building. I picture someone quietly waiting above me, counting down until I lock the door and leave, every single time I do. About 2 years ago, I decided to rent a warehouse to store my growing vintage clothing collection for my shop. I had a tiny storefront downtown and did okay online, but clothes were everywhere. Stockroom packed, my apartment packed, my parents gently asking when their garage would stop being temporary storage. One night in early fall, I finally admitted I needed more space, opened Facebook, and posted in a few local business groups that I was looking for a small warehouse to rent. Nothing fancy, just dry and secure. 3 days later, a woman named Carla messaged me. She said she had a warehouse, about 200 square meters, on the edge of the industrial zone that had been empty for 6 months. The rent was $750 a month, which was literally half what I'd seen on listing sites. She sent a voice message explaining she'd leased it through a management company for her own import business. But the business tanked and now she was stuck with the lease. If she could sublet to me, at least she wouldn't be paying for a dead space by herself. She sent photos: clean concrete floor, high ceiling, roll-up door, bright strip lights, metal shelving along the walls. It looked legit and honestly kind of ideal for what I needed. We went back and forth a bit, and when I said I wanted to see it as soon as possible, she suggested Saturday at 3 in the afternoon. Saturday I drove over alone in my van. I thought briefly about asking my boyfriend or my dad to come, but it was broad daylight. This was supposed to be a business thing, and Carla sounded normal on the phone. The GPS led me through a busy part of the industrial area, then farther out, then down a narrow street with empty lots and a couple of abandoned containers. The farther I drove, the quieter it got. At the very end of the road stood a low concrete building with a big metal roll-up door and a smaller side door. No cars nearby. No people. Carla was waiting by the entrance with a folder in her hands. She looked around 50, in a basic dark suit and flats, hair pulled back. Tired face but polite. "You must be Emma," she said. Quick handshake, quick smile, and then she unlocked the side door and waved me inside. The place looked just like the pictures. One big open room, concrete floor, high ceiling, fluorescent lights, metal shelves bolted to the walls. At the back was the roll-up door and a regular door that she said led to shared bathrooms and a hallway. She walked me around like she'd done this 100 times, showed me the electrical panel, where the main breaker was, where trucks used to back up, where she'd had her little office corner. Then she handed me a key ring and told me to try everything myself. I opened and closed the roll-up door, checked the locks, walked around clapping my hands like I was already picturing racks and bins everywhere. Everything seemed fine, but she kept glancing at her watch. "I do have to leave by 3:20. I'm meeting someone," she said. Maybe 3 different times. It was barely 10 after 3. Her voice was tight each time she said it, like she was rehearsing a line. When I asked if the management company was okay with her subletting, she paused, then said, "Yeah, it's allowed. They know what I'm doing," but didn't open the folder she was holding. That bothered me. I asked if I could see the lease agreement anyway, just to check that clause. She went still for a second, then said, "It's in my car, I'll grab it," and headed back out the side door. As soon as the door shut behind her, the good feeling dropped. I pulled out my phone and called my friend Jess, who works at a real estate agency. I told her quickly that I was standing inside a warehouse a woman wanted to sublet to me, gave her the exact address from Carla's message, and asked if anything about it sounded off. "Hang on," Jess said, and I heard her typing. I walked over to one of the shelves and pretended to study the bolts, trying not to look like someone who had just realized she might be in a bad situation. When Jess came back, her tone was different. "Okay, this is not right. That property is in our system as an abandoned warehouse. The last tenant went bankrupt. The building reverted to city ownership months ago. There is no active lease, no current tenant. Nobody can legally sublet you anything there." I stared at the roll-up door and felt my throat go dry. "So she's lying?" I asked, even though it was obvious. "At best, she's lying. At worst, you're in the middle of something sketchy," Jess said. "Get out, right now. Don't argue, don't sign, don't give her money. Just leave and call me later, okay? Emma, I'm serious." My hands started shaking. I said okay, thanked her, and ended the call. For a couple of seconds, I just stood there in the empty space, phone in my hand, listening to my own breathing and trying to figure out how to walk out calmly when my whole body was screaming at me to run. The side door opened again. Carla came back in, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in his 30s walked in right behind her. Stocky, work jacket, heavy boots, hands shoved into his pockets like he'd done this a lot. He didn't smile or say hi. He looked straight at me, up and down, like confirming something. "Is this her?" he asked. Carla's eyes stayed on me as she gave a short, tight nod. Seeing both of them standing there between me and the exit, I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I walked toward the door instead of running and forced my voice to sound normal. I said I had just remembered I left the oven on at home, that I needed to go right now and we could sign everything later. I didn't stop to see how they reacted. Carla stepped in front of me and grabbed my arm, nails hard on my skin. "Wait! We haven't signed the contract yet!" she snapped. The guy shifted behind her like he was ready to block the way. That was enough. I yanked my arm free, said I was leaving now, pulled the door open, and slid past her. The man shouted something, but I was already running to my van, fumbling with the keys and driving away without looking back. After a few blocks, I pulled into a gas station and parked near the side wall. I sat there for a second with my hands locked on the wheel, then grabbed my phone and called Jess. She answered right away. I told her I had gotten out, that Carla had brought some guy in, that it felt really wrong. Jess said she was already on the phone with the police because the property showed as abandoned in her system. A few moments later, an officer joined the call. He confirmed where I was, asked if I was safe, then had me describe everything from the first message to me driving off. The photos, the low rent, the story about the management company, their ages, clothes, and how Carla grabbed me when I tried to leave. While we were talking, he said a patrol car was already on the way and asked me to come in later for a formal statement. I agreed, drove home, and waited for Jess to call me back. Around half an hour later, she told me the officers had arrived at the warehouse. It was open and completely empty. No boxes, no furniture, no paperwork, no cars outside. They tried calling Carla's number from the scene and got an error message. By the next morning, the number didn't work at all. Later at the station, I repeated everything for a detective. He said it looked like an attempted robbery scheme they had seen before, where scammers lure people to isolated properties with fake rentals, then demand cash or valuables once the person is inside and alone. They tried to trace Carla's phone and profile, but the number was prepaid, the account was new, and nothing led to a real person. The case stayed open for 2 months, and then was closed with no suspects. After that, I changed the way I looked for space. I stopped answering private messages from random profiles and ignored every perfect warehouse offer in local groups. If a place wasn't listed through a licensed agency or management company I could check, I just scrolled past it. Jess showed me how to look up basic information in the city database, and I started doing that before I even called anyone. About a month later, I found a smaller warehouse in a busier area, rented through a real company with an office and staff. The rent was about 1.5 times more than Carla's offer, but I saw the ownership records myself, signed proper documents at a real desk, and moved my inventory in only after everything checked out. I replay that day, and know one phone call kept it from getting worse, so I never go to a viewing alone, and I always run the address through the records online first. During the fall of 2021, me and my friends got really into urban photography, shooting abandoned buildings for a photo project. I'm 28 now, and this was 3 years ago, but that one trip still sticks with me more than anything else we shot. In September, me, Mike, and Sarah drove out to this old psychiatric hospital about 2 hours from Detroit. Mike found it on some Urbex forum and wouldn't shut up about it, saying the textures there would carry the whole zine. I was the cautious one, so I checked what I could online. Closed since 1995. No business filings, no security company listed. Still trespassing, but it looked like nobody had cared in a long time. We got there around noon on a Saturday. The grounds were huge, a bunch of buildings connected by covered walkways, trees growing into everything. The main building was 4 stories of gray stone with smashed windows. We parked down the road so the car wasn't obvious and slipped through a bend in the fence. Up close, there wasn't much fresh graffiti or trash, which somehow made me more nervous. Mike found an unboarded first-floor window around back, tested it with his shoulder, then tossed his bag in and climbed through. Sarah went next, then me. Inside, it smelled like wet paper and dust. We dropped into what used to be the lobby. Smashed reception desk, plastic chairs, a wheelchair on its side. Paint sheets were hanging off the walls. Mike started shooting right away. Exit signs, broken glass, the wheelchair. We headed into a main hallway lined with patient rooms. Some doors were locked solid, some missing. One room still had a metal bed frame bolted to the floor. Another had a restraint chair on its back, straps stiff and still buckled. Sarah joked about how awful it would be to sit in it, and then just stopped, like she hurt herself. Mike crouched and shot close-ups of the straps and cracked tiles. It didn't feel dangerous yet. I was more worried about rotten floors than people. It was the same routine as the other places. Watch your step, get the shot, don't get arrested. We went up the stairs to the 2nd floor where the admin stuff was. Faded signs still said, administration, records, staff lounge. The offices were a wreck. Desks flipped, drawers dumped, phones hanging by their cords. In the lounge, old vending machines had been smashed. Only the candy bar stickers were left. The records room was different. The filing cabinets had been forced open, but most of the folders were still there, just all over the floor. Hundreds of yellow files, some swollen from leaks. Sarah crouched and picked one up. She brushed it off and started reading the case history of a woman with schizophrenia in the 80s. Restraints, suicide watch, meds adjusted over and over. Hearing it out loud in that room made my skin crawl. Mike cut her off and said that was a huge privacy thing, and we shouldn't be reading people's charts, that we'd blur names if any ended up in frame. He nudged files out of the way with his shoe instead of stepping on them. We took a couple wide shots and left. On the third floor, everything felt different right away. Most of the hallway windows were boarded from the inside, so it was darker even though it was midday. Our footsteps echoed more. At the far end was a line of heavy doors under a faded sign. Isolation ward. We tried the handles one by one. Every door was locked like it hadn't moved since the day they closed the place. Mike joked about final level content, but didn't push it. None of us wanted to start kicking doors in an abandoned psych hospital. Right next to the locked ward doors was an open doorway into a large room. We went in with our phone lights up. It was a treatment room. Old exam tables, IV stands, cabinets hanging crooked. Then the light caught movement. 3 men were sitting on the floor against the far wall. They were filthy, hair long, clothes layered and torn. For a split second, my brain filed them as mannequins or props because it didn't want them to be real. And then one of them shifted and looked right at us. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice dry and raspy. Mike answered that we were photographers, just exploring the place, not trying to bother anyone. The man planted his hand on the wall and stood up slowly. The other 2 got to their feet too. One of them had a rusty wrench hanging from his hand. I felt Sarah tense beside me, and she moved in close until our shoulders touched. The first man shuffled a little nearer and repeated, "Photographers," with a small smirk that didn't look friendly. "You got money? Phones?" We all started backing toward the door at the same time. Mike said we didn't have cash, and we were leaving. The man reached out and grabbed Mike's sleeve. Not hard, just enough to stop him. "Wait, show me the camera." Mike hesitated, then slipped the strap off his neck and handed it over. The man took it carefully and turned it around in his hands. He thumbed through the pictures, scrolling through our shots from the lobby and upper floors. "You been to the isolation ward?" he asked without looking up. "No, the door's locked," Sarah said. Her voice sounded tight. "Good. Don't go there. Bad things in there." He handed the camera back to Mike. Even now, when I think about that afternoon, my memory always snaps to that moment in the treatment room. Mike clutching his camera again, Sarah pressed against my arm, and that second guy suddenly breaking into this wild, hysterical laugh that echoed off the walls as he pointed straight at us over and over, yelling, "They don't know! They don't know!" and pointing right at us. The third man with the wrench started moving towards Sarah. She stepped back and bumped into an old gurney, which rattled loudly. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door. "We're leaving. Right now," I said. Mike was already in the doorway, holding his camera against his chest. He kept his eyes on the men as we backed out of the room. We rushed into the corridor and headed for the stairwell. Behind us, I heard their footsteps, and one of them shouting something. I didn't hear the words, but the tone was enough. Mike hit the stairwell door with his shoulder, got it open, and we started running down. I was in the middle, Sarah behind me, one hand on the rail so she wouldn't slip. We passed the second floor landing and kept going until we reached the first. On the first floor, we pushed into the main hallway. Mike was still in front. Sarah stayed right behind me like we'd lined up on purpose. Halfway down the hall, we heard voices ahead. Low male voices that weren't ours. I couldn't see anyone yet, but they were close enough that stopping felt stupid. Mike swore under his breath and jerked left into a side corridor. We followed him without arguing. The side hall was narrow, lined with storage rooms and peeling signs. Mike tried the first door. It didn't move. He slammed his shoulder into the next one, and it flew open enough for us to squeeze through. Inside were metal shelves, tipped boxes, and one window with most of the glass already gone. Through it, I could see the trees behind the building. I brushed the loose pieces of glass off the sill with my sleeve and climbed out first. The drop outside was only a couple of feet. I turned, took Sarah's hands, and helped her down. Mike handed his camera to me, slid through the window, then grabbed it back. We kept low and moved straight into the trees, away from the wall. I could still hear faint shouting from inside the building, but no one climbed out after us. Our car was where we'd left it, half hidden between a few trees near the back fence. We jumped in without talking. My hands shook so much I fumbled the keys twice before the engine started. I pulled out onto the empty road and didn't slow down until the hospital was out of sight. Sarah sat hunched in the passenger seat, crying quietly into her sleeves. Mike was in the back, silent, staring at the floor of the car. After a while, he finally spoke and said he needed to check his camera. He scrolled through the photos and told us the last ones from upstairs were gone, but not all of them. For a minute, the only sounds were the tires and Sarah trying to get her breathing under control. Then Mike asked if we should call the police. We talked it out and kept coming back to the same thing: trespassing, breaking in, maybe losing our gear. By the time we reached the city, we'd convinced ourselves those men were just squatters who didn't want trouble, and that getting the cops involved would only bring trouble down on us. A few weeks later, I saw a news article about the hospital. Police had cleared out homeless squatters there, and in the basement found 2 bodies. One was a missing man accused of kidnapping, and investigators thought the place was being used for other crimes. I still think about his warning and leaving. When I was 32 and working as a regional sales manager, I stopped at Chipotle on Cavalier Drive at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. Already running half an hour late, I sold office equipment, lived alone in a condo in Gilbert, and almost always cooked at home. That morning I'd overslept, rushed through a shower, skipped breakfast, and by the time I turned off the main road, my hands were starting to shake from being hungry. Inside, the place was packed. For 10 in the morning, it was weirdly busy. A line snaked almost to the door. 2 cashiers were calling for the next person, and hip-hop thumped from the ceiling speakers while people shouted orders over each other. I got in line, pulled out my phone, and skimmed a couple of messages from my boss asking if I had touched base with a client yet, which only made me more aware of the time. While I was standing there, I noticed an older man by the drink station. He looked somewhere between 65 and 70, in a wrinkled flannel shirt and worn jeans. Gray hair stuck out at odd angles, and his face was covered in uneven stubble. He didn't look dirty, just beaten down. He filled a big cup with lemonade, took several long gulps right there, then refilled it to the brim. A minute later, he did it again. No one behind the counter reacted. The crew just kept building bowls and burritos like he wasn't there. He stayed at that spot, leaning one hip against the counter, sipping and refilling while everyone else moved past him. I tried to stop watching and went back to my phone, but every time the line inched forward, my eyes slid back in his direction. He didn't seem to be waiting for food or anyone else. He just stood there, like that corner was the only place he had to be. My turn came. I ordered a chicken bowl, rattled off toppings without thinking, paid with the company card, and grabbed the bag and the bowl. My head went straight back to my schedule. Drive time to the first client, where I'd park, how I'd explain walking in late. So I just aimed for the door and started walking. He stepped in front of me so smooth it felt like he appeared out of nowhere. Same older man, now planted right in front of the glass door. One hand rested on the push bar, his body angled so he covered the way out. I shifted left, gave a quick, polite smile. "Excuse me," I said, trying to slide past him. He moved with me, blocking the path. "I need your help," he said loudly. The people at the nearest table went quiet and turned their heads just enough to see without being obvious. "I'm really in a hurry," I told him. "I'm late for a meeting. I can't stop. Sorry." I wasn't trying to be rude. I just honestly didn't have extra time. He reached out and grabbed my blazer sleeve, fingers clamping around the fabric. "Give me $20, he said. "I need to buy my medicine." His voice was flat, not pleading. It sounded like an order. I pulled my arm back until his hand slipped off. "I can't do that," I said, keeping my voice low. "Please let me by." His face changed in a second. His eyes narrowed, his jaw locked, and his shoulders came forward like he was bracing for a fight. "You rich bastards think you're better than everybody," he shouted. "I fought for this country and you can't give me $20? His voice jumped to a harsh yell. People started moving away from us, picking up their trays and shuffling further into the dining area. Chairs scraped on the floor. The cashier closest to us froze halfway through handing someone their receipt. The music was still going, but it suddenly felt like background noise to his shouting. The manager, a young Latina woman in a black polo, came around the counter with her hands slightly raised. "Sir, you need to calm down or you're going to have to leave," she said. Her tone was firm, but she kept a few steps back. He acted like she wasn't even there. His eyes stayed locked on mine. I shifted to the right, trying again to angle past him toward the door. He followed that move too, and this time shoved me in the shoulder. I stumbled back a half step. The bowl tipped in my hands, but I managed not to drop it. "You're not going anywhere till you give me the money," he said, stepping in closer. I could smell alcohol on his breath and that heavy, sour sweat that sticks to clothes. $20. That's nothing to you. Someone behind me said, louder than they probably meant to, "I already called the cops." I didn't turn to see who it was, just heard the words. His head twitched toward the sound, then snapped back to me. His fist came up fast like he was about to smash it straight into my face. Instinct kicked in, and I shifted sideways until my shoulder hit the wall. His punch turned into a wild swing that went past my cheek and hit nothing. He had to catch his balance, and for a second he just stood there breathing hard while everyone else pretended they weren't watching us. Then he spun toward the exit like he'd made a sudden decision. He shoved the door open with his shoulder, stepped out onto the concrete, and then stopped just outside. Even now I can still see how he turned his head back, eyes locked right on me through the glass, and said, almost calm, "I'm going to remember you. I'll see you in the parking lot." He shoved the door so hard on his way out that the glass actually rattled. For a second, everybody just froze, like they were waiting to see if he was coming back in. Then people started talking again, but it sounded forced, like everyone was pretending nothing happened. The manager came over to me first, asking if I was okay, saying she was sorry about that situation. She said he'd been in a few times before, usually just loud, never that bad. She offered me a free drink, said she could comp something or give me a coupon for next time. I told her I was fine and I really just wanted to leave. I didn't want a free drink. I just wanted to be out of there and away from that guy. My hands were still shaking a little. I tossed my empty cup, adjusted the bowl and the bag in my arms, and walked toward the door, already thinking about how I was going to explain being late again to a client who was already annoyed with me. When I got close enough to see the lot clearly through the glass, my stomach dropped. He was standing by my car, my black Honda Accord, parked 3 spots from the door. He was on the driver's side, leaning in. For a second, I told myself he was just walking past it. But then I saw his hand on the handle. He pulled it up hard, then peered inside, then yanked it again like he thought it would suddenly open. I stopped a few feet back from the door without even meaning to. I always lock my car, so I knew he shouldn't be able to get in. But seeing him tug on the handle like that made my chest feel tight. I set the bowl and the bag down on the nearest empty table, dug my phone out of my pocket, and opened the camera. My thought was simple. Get him on video messing with the car so I'd have proof if anything happened. As soon as I raised my phone, he turned his head. Our eyes met through the glass. His face tightened, not like he was scared of getting caught, more like he was irritated I'd seen him. He dropped the handle and started walking straight toward the restaurant again, that same stiff walk he'd had when he blocked me before. Before I could move, the big guy in the Arizona Cardinals shirt stood up from a table near the window. He walked past me, pushed the door open, and went outside ahead of me like it was nothing. He planted himself between us, feet apart. "Dude, back off," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. He didn't shout. It just sounded firm, like he meant it. The older man stopped a few feet away from him. They stared at each other. The older guy's hands were clenched at his sides. The bigger guy just stood there solid, like he was used to breaking up fights. I stayed behind the glass with my phone up, recording without really planning to, just doing it. It felt longer, but it was probably around a minute of them standing like that. Nobody else came outside, but I could feel people watching from inside. In that weird quiet, I finally heard sirens, far away at first, then closer. That rising and falling sound you know is a patrol car. The older man glanced toward the street where the sound was coming from, then looked back at me through the glass. He gave me one last look, full of pure hate, then turned away. He cut across the parking lot toward the sidewalk, weaving between a couple of empty spaces, and kept going without looking back. A few seconds later, he disappeared around the corner of the shopping center. By the time the police cruiser pulled into the lot with its lights on, he was gone. The officers still drove around the building, checked the back, and looked down the side street. But they didn't find anyone matching what I'd told them. They came inside and sat down with me at a table. I walked them through everything from when I first saw him at the drink station to him trying my car door. I gave them the best description I could. Older white guy, rough beard, messed up gray hair, flannel shirt, jeans, smelled like alcohol, aggressive, grabbed my sleeve, tried to swing at me. One officer wrote while the other asked short questions, just checking details. They said they'd patrol the area more often for a while, and told me that if I saw him again I should not try to talk to him, just call 911. The guy in the Cardinals shirt came over when they were done. Up close he looked mid-30s, in shape, like he lived in that gym shirt. He held out his hand and said his name was Brad, told me he worked as a personal trainer in the gym a couple doors down. I shook his hand and thanked him, probably more than I needed to. We exchanged numbers in case the police needed another witness later. He told me not to let it ruin my day, said parking lots around there drew weirdos sometimes, and it wasn't my fault. When I finally pulled out of the lot, the bowl was still sitting untouched on the passenger seat. I checked the time and realized I was going to be at least an hour late. I called the client, blamed it on traffic and a problem at another stop. By the time I parked outside their office, the food was cold, and I threw it away without even opening it. For the next few days, I went out of my way to avoid that Chipotle. I changed my routes, grabbed coffee and snacks from other places, even if it took extra time. Once, at the Circle K down the street, I saw an older guy in a flannel standing by the door, and my heart sank. But when he turned his head, it wasn't him. The police never found the man. When I called the non-emergency line later, they said my description fit a lot of people, and the parking lot cameras had been down that week. I still think about him sometimes, and wonder if I should have just handed over $20. But the way he demanded it, like I owed him, still makes me feel like refusing was the only real option I had. Back in 2018, I was working as a house sitter while in college. It was easy money for a broke student. I could study, feed some cats, and pretend I lived in nicer houses than I'd ever afford. I was 24, juggling exams and shifts at a coffee shop, when my acquaintances Mark and Jennifer asked if I could watch their place on the outskirts of town while they went to Europe for 2 weeks. Their house was big, 2 stories with a neat yard, 2 lazy cats, and an aquarium full of tropical fish that looked expensive. My job was simple: feed everyone, water the plants, bring in the mail, and make sure the place didn't burn down or flood. The street was quiet, just a small row of private houses. The closest neighbors were about 50 meters away, and tall trees ringed the yard, so once that front door shut, you felt alone. We agreed I didn't have to sleep there. I lived maybe 10 minutes away. So I'd just come twice a day, morning and evening, and send Jennifer a quick text if anything looked off. The first 3 days were boring in a good way. I'd come by, talk to the cats like a crazy person, toss in fish food, open a window for a bit, then sit at their kitchen table and read while the dishwasher hummed. At night, I'd double-check doors and windows, set the alarm, and leave. The most exciting thing that happened was one of the cats knocking a plant over. By the 3rd night, I'd started to relax about being in someone else's big, empty house. It felt routine. On the 4th day, a Tuesday, I got there around 7 in the evening. It was already getting dim outside. I was in the kitchen pouring dry food into the cat bowls when the doorbell rang. It startled me because Mark hadn't mentioned anyone coming by, and I knew they were still overseas. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked down the short hallway to the front door. Out of habit, I reached for the lock, then hesitated and checked the peephole first. There was a man standing on the porch, maybe around 50, gray hair at the sides, wearing an orange reflective vest with gas company printed on it. He held a clipboard in one hand, and I could see a badge hanging from a lanyard on his chest, but I couldn't read the name through the peephole. He looked like any other utility worker you'd see in a neighborhood. No visible tattoos on his neck or hands, no wild movements, just standing there, waiting. I slid the chain across, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door a few inches. "Hi, can I help you?" I asked. He gave me this friendly, automatic smile. "Evening. Sorry to bother you," he said. "We're doing mandatory gas meter inspections in this area. I just need to come in, check the meter and the lines. Should only take a few minutes. Is the basement inside?" I told him the owners weren't home, that I was just house-sitting and hadn't heard about any inspections. His smile didn't drop, but his tone changed. It got firmer, like I'd annoyed him. He said the inspection was required by law. They had sent notices out, and if I refused to let him in, he'd have to mark the property as non-compliant, and the gas could be shut off. He kept talking about your account and your service, like he was trying to pressure me into feeling responsible. The more he pushed, the more wrong it felt. Real workers I'd dealt with before were usually laid back, almost bored, and they always mentioned the company name 5 times in the first 30 seconds. He hadn't done that once. I could feel my heart start to pound, but I tried to sound calm. I told him, "I'm going to call the gas company right now to verify. If they say you're scheduled, I'll open up." For the briefest second, his expression shifted. The smile stayed on his mouth, but his eyes narrowed and went flat, like he was suddenly angry. He didn't say, "Sure, go ahead," or anything normal like that. He just stared at me through the gap and said, in this tight voice, "Ma'am, I don't have all night. You're holding up my route. That was enough for me. I said, "1 minute," closed the door, slid the deadbolt, and stepped back. My hands were shaking now. I took my phone out of my pocket, pulled up the gas company's customer service number from a bill Mark had left on the fridge, and called. After the usual automated menu, an operator answered. I told her I was house-sitting, gave her the street and account name, and asked if they had anyone in an orange vest doing inspections on that block tonight. She put me on hold for maybe 15 seconds, then came back sounding more serious. She said they had no inspections scheduled there, no technicians assigned to that area, and they never shut off gas on the spot for refusing entry. Then she said, very clearly, that if someone was insisting like that, I should hang up and call the police immediately. I said, okay. But my thumb just hovered over the end call button. I could hear my own breathing in my ear, and the house suddenly felt too big and too quiet. Part of me kept trying to explain it away. Maybe she was wrong, maybe there was some mix-up. And the other part was replaying his voice at the door and the way he'd leaned in when I mentioned calling. I walked back to the front door, phone still in my hand, and pressed my eye to the peephole again. The man was still on the porch, but now he was pacing slowly along it, pausing to lean toward the glass and looking into the first-floor windows. The vest hung on him loosely, like he had borrowed it from someone bigger, and from that angle I could see how the fabric sat wrong on his shoulders. The clipboard looked beat up and scratched, not like company gear, more like something from a garage sale. That detail finally pushed me. I stepped back from the door and pulled up the dial screen for 911. My thumb hovered over the call button. I did not press it. Not yet. I just stood there with the screen glowing in my hand, trying to hear every tiny sound from the porch. He rang the doorbell again, 2 quick hits, then started knocking harder. "Ma'am? Everything okay in there?" He called out, louder now, putting this fake concern in his voice. It sounded like he wanted any neighbor who might be listening to hear that he was the good guy. I kept my mouth shut. I even shifted my face away from the edge of the door so I would not breathe near the gap. He went quiet, then knocked again, slower this time, like he was thinking it through. After what felt like a full minute of silence, I heard the boards creak as he moved away. I counted to 5, then 10, under my breath before I let myself move. Then I hurried down the hallway toward the back of the house. In the kitchen, I flicked off the main light so I would not be a clear shape in the window, then slid to the side of the sink and peeked through a narrow gap in the curtain. He was already in the yard, walking straight toward the patio door like he knew the layout. I watched him grab the handle and give it a hard pull, then another, like he was testing whether a good shove would pop it open. It did not move. Mark was obsessive about locking things, and in that second I was grateful for it. The man stood there staring at the glass, then pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and ran the beam along the frame. After that, he pointed it straight inside, sweeping it over the table, the chairs, the aquarium. I dropped into a crouch so fast my knees hit the cabinet door. One of the cats shot out of the room and my heart jumped into my throat because I was sure he heard that. I pressed my back against the lower cabinets and stayed completely still, fingers locked around my phone. I could hear my pulse in my ears and the faint tap of the flashlight body hitting the glass when he shifted his grip. The light slid from the patio door to the nearest windows, jerking in short little movements as he leaned closer, trying to see inside. I did not move, even when my legs started to go numb and my toes tingled. The 911 screen was still open in my hand, and I kept telling myself that if I heard anything that sounded like breaking glass or a lock being forced, I would hit call without thinking. Finally, the beam pulled away from the window. A few seconds later, I heard the crunch of his footsteps on the gravel path along the side of the house, each step softer than the last. Until I could not hear him anymore, I stayed crouched there, counting slow breaths, then waited another 10 minutes before I even went near the front of the house. When I finally eased the curtain at the front window back, the unfamiliar car that had been parked on the street was gone. My hands were still shaking as I called Mark, then added Jennifer on speaker so I only had to tell the story once. I went through everything: the gas company vest, the clipboard, the way he tried the patio door and shined the flashlight inside. They were shocked, kept asking if I was okay, then both told me to stay in the house with everything locked until the police got there. Only then did I hit call on 911. About 20 minutes later, 2 officers showed up, walked the perimeter with their flashlights, checked every door and window, and then took my statement at the kitchen table. One of them told me there had been a few similar reports in the suburbs lately. Scammers posing as utility workers to get inside and rob people, sometimes in pairs, so one person kept the owner busy at the front door, while another slipped in through the back. I still think about how close I came to opening that chain. I keep replaying it, wondering what would have happened if I had believed him, if I had just unlatched the door so he could check the meter. Maybe he would have pushed his way in as soon as he saw I was alone, or maybe someone else was already waiting for a signal near the back of the property. I do not know if he had been watching the house and knew Mark and Jennifer were out of the country, or if I was just the first person who answered the door that night. But the part that scares me most is how normal he looked until the second I said I was going to verify his story. Before I joined the competitive circuit, I used to work as a high school math teacher, and in my free time I trained for triathlons. I was 32, grading tests all day, then squeezing swims and runs into whatever was left of my energy at night. I wasn't even close to pro level, but I loved signing up for little amateur races all over Colorado. It gave structure to my week, and an excuse to drive somewhere new every few weekends. One of those was a race in Boulder. I'd driven up alone before dawn, did the swim, and crawled my way through the bike and run. I'd just staggered over the finish line and was trying not to throw up when this guy stepped right in front of me. About 40, maybe baseball cap, that overexcited look spectators get. He smiled and said, "Hey, great job. You're really something. Can I get a picture with you?" I assumed he'd mixed me up with somebody else until he used my full name. That made me look up. He introduced himself as Steven and said he'd seen me race last year at another event. Then he started rattling off details about that race. How hot it was, the color of my tri-suit, the way I cramped near the end but refused to walk. He wasn't wrong, and hearing it from a stranger felt strange. He said he liked watching people who just kept going. I was still flooded with endorphins and honestly a little flattered, so I shrugged and let him take a selfie, me sweaty and gasping in the background. Then he pulled out a Sharpie and asked me to sign his race t-shirt. I laughed and told him that made no sense, that I was a math teacher, not an Olympian, but he held the fabric tight and said, "You're an inspiration to me. Please." It felt over the top, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I scrawled my first name over the logo. He stared at it like it was important, kept repeating, "This is awesome," while I tried to edge away to grab water. About a week later, I got a message request on Instagram. It was Steven. He'd found my profile and sent this long paragraph about how impressed he was with my discipline and how he was looking forward to my next performance so he could cheer for me again. I showed it to a coworker at lunch, and she joked that I had a fan now. I answered with a quick, "Thanks, that's nice of you," and then pushed it out of my mind. At the time, it felt harmless. A month after that, I raced in Denver. Bigger event, closer to home. I was lining up near the start when I heard my name being yelled from behind the fence. Way louder than everyone else, I turned and saw Steven holding a homemade sign that said, "Go Karen," in uneven letters. Other athletes looked over at me like I was important, and I wanted to disappear into the crowd. Every time I passed that stretch on the run, I could hear him screaming my name like we were close. When I finished and shuffled through the chute, he appeared again, weaving through sweaty finishers with a bouquet of supermarket flowers in his hand. "You were incredible," he said, breathing hard though he hadn't raced. "I came in from another city just to see you." That comment landed wrong. Driving in just to watch a random amateur felt like too much. I thanked him but told him I was just doing local races for fun, that I didn't really need, a fan section with posters. His expression changed fast. The smile slid off and he looked almost hurt. "I just wanted to support you. I thought we were friends," he said. "We're connected through this. Through the sport." The way he said, "friends," made my stomach tighten. We'd talked twice. I told him I appreciated the encouragement. I just wasn't used to that level of attention. After a second, he forced a smile, pushed the flowers into my hands anyway, and said he'd be at the next one. By the time the third race rolled around, in Fort Collins, I was already checking crowds without really meaning to. Transition areas are always chaotic, but I spotted him fast. Steven was by the fence again, and this time he had a young woman standing next to him. "Karen," he called, waving me over. "This is my niece, Ashley. She's really inspired by you." Ashley looked about 20 and completely uncomfortable. She gave me a quick half smile, barely met my eyes, and kept her arms crossed. When I asked if she raced too, she mumbled, "No, I just came with him," and went quiet. Steven cut in to say she watched all my results online and was shy. It felt like he'd dragged her there to make everything seem normal, and she was just playing along because she had to ride home with him while I was stretching before the start. I noticed Steven holding his phone up, camera pointed straight at me. He wasn't filming the crowd or the start line, just me tying my shoes, rolling my shoulders, doing drills. I walked over and said, "Hey, can you not take pictures of me without asking? It makes me uncomfortable. Could you delete those?" He laughed like I'd told a joke, said, "You're an athlete. You should expect cameras." But he did a quick tap through and showed me an empty gallery. I didn't believe him. But I let it go because the swim was about to start. The race itself is a blur. I remember more about the parking lot afterward. I got my bike loaded as fast as I could, helmet tossed into the back seat, still damp, just wanting to be home. When I turned around, Steven was there again, leaning near my car like he'd been waiting the whole time. No Ashley. He glanced at the bike jammed into my small hatchback and said, I could give you and the bike a ride. My car's a lot bigger. I saw you struggling with it." That was when the polite thing snapped. I told him no, firmly, that I preferred to drive myself, and I had things to do on the way home. He kept pushing, saying it would be safer, that it made sense to travel together since we kept ending up at the same races. Like this was something we'd planned. I had to repeat myself, more blunt this time, that I wasn't going with him. His jaw tightened, and he stepped back. I got in, locked the doors out of habit, and pulled out of the spot. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and when I checked the rearview mirror to calm myself down, I saw Steven get in his car and follow me. I stayed on the main road and grabbed my phone at a light. I called my husband Tom at home and tried to keep my voice steady while I told him a man from my races was following my car. I kept it simple because I didn't want to scare him. Just said, "I'm a few minutes away. Can you wait outside for me? Stand on the porch so he sees you." Tom went quiet for a second, then said he'd go out right then and asked if he should call the police. I told him not yet, that I just wanted someone outside when I pulled in, and I'd see what the guy did. Those last turns toward our street felt longer than the race. His car stayed behind mine, not close, not backing off, just there. When I turned onto our street, I saw Tom already standing on the porch, arms crossed, watching for me. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I pulled into the driveway and tried not to look in the mirror, but I still saw Steven's car roll slowly past our house. He saw Tom. I know he did. And then he just kept going down the block without even glancing back. I sat there for a moment before getting out. Tom came down the steps asking who that was and what was going on. Inside, I gave him the short version, and his face got tighter with every new detail. He said this wasn't some harmless fan, that I needed to cut him off completely. That night, I blocked Steven on every account, locked down my profiles, and changed a few usernames. Then I emailed the organizers for my next races, told them I had someone crossing lines, and gave them his name and description. They answered that if he showed up and bothered me, security would deal with him. The next race came and went, and he wasn't there. Part of me relaxed and started to think maybe I'd embarrassed him enough that he'd just move on. About a month later, during a free period at school, I opened my work email and saw his name in my inbox. He'd written to the address listed on the school website, and the subject line was just my full name. The email was long and angry. He said I had betrayed our friendship, that I'd lied to him by not mentioning my husband, that I'd used his support for my results and then thrown him away. He went on about how I owed him honesty, how I'd led him on by accepting his cheers and taking the flowers he wrote like we had been in some secret relationship I'd refused to admit. Reading it made my hands shake worse than they had in the car. I didn't reply. I printed the email, saved a copy on my computer, and walked it straight to my principal. After school, Tom went with me to the police station so I could file a report. At the station, the officer said the email wasn't a direct threat, so they couldn't charge him. But he attached it to my report and said it would be on file if things escalated. Steven stopped coming to races and never contacted me. Months later, a woman told me he'd followed her to events with gifts until she went to the police too. I'm stricter about what I share, and Tom comes when he can, because I know it could have ended worse. And I think about this. What if Tom hadn't been home? So when I was 28, I almost died at a music festival, because I'm usually the person who shows up on time to everything. It was July 2019, and I was in this weird limbo period of my life, living alone in a small apartment in Southeast Portland and pretending freelancing as a graphic designer was going better than it really was. Most days were just me, my laptop, and some podcast playing while I answered client emails in sweatpants. I had started talking to my plants, which was probably the clearest sign that I needed to leave the apartment and see another human being. So I said yes. Amy was an old friend from college, the person I used all my free time with, from all-nighters in the computer lab to cheap basement shows. 2 years before the festival, we had stopped talking after a dumb fight over a freelance client. I got the job. She felt like I had cut her out, and we both dug our heels in. So when she messaged asking if I wanted a spare ticket to a festival in Laurelhurst Park, I stared at my phone before finally typing, "Yeah, I'll come." The plan was simple. Meet at the park entrance at 7, right when the first band went on, grab a drink, then hang out until the headliner. This band we had screamed along to in college house parties. Amy texted me a screenshot of the schedule with, "We are absolutely losing our voices during this one." And I sent back a bunch of exclamation points and told her I would be there right on time. I even showered early, did my makeup for once, picked out a dress that did not look like pajamas, and still somehow managed to be shoving my keys into my bag a good 10 minutes later than I meant to. As soon as I pulled onto Burnside, traffic stopped and just stayed there. We inched forward until I could see flashing lights, and an SUV smashed into the back of a truck, blocking 2 lanes near the middle of the bridge. The clock on my dash slid past 7 while we moved a car length every few minutes, and my jaw hurt from clenching. I texted Amy, "Stuck in traffic on Burnside. Go in without me. I'll find you inside." Then stared at the message like maybe that would make everything move faster. She wrote back that she would wait at the entrance so we could walk in together, and started sending photos of the growing crowd by the gates, joking that I owed her a drink for making her stand there in the heat. Traffic finally opened up around 7:35, and I sped off the bridge, parked on a side street, and started walking toward the park. On the sidewalk, I checked my phone and saw her last text. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." I rolled my eyes at the smiley face and picked up my pace, already rehearsing some big apology in my head. Then I heard a quick string of popping sounds from inside the park, too flat and fast to feel like fireworks, and people near the gate suddenly turned and started running toward me. Someone sprinted past, yelling into his phone that there was a shooter by the ticket tables. I kept hitting redial on her number while people shoved past me, but every call went straight to voicemail and my texts just hung on, sending. Police stretched yellow tape across the entrance, shouted for everyone to move back, and eventually started directing anyone looking for friends or family to a temporary family center at a nearby community building inside. At the family center, a staffer told me that around 7:40, a man with a handgun had opened fire near the entrance, killing 4 people and wounding several more, including Amy. She said Amy had been hit through the shoulder and into her lung, but paramedics got her to the hospital fast. Hours later, she lay pale in bed describing the silent man in black. That stupid traffic jam I'd been so angry about had saved my life. The next few days after the festival barely feel real when I think back on them. I just remember the glow of the TV, my laptop open in front of me, my phone in my hand, bouncing between news sites and social media like I was going to unlock some hidden angle no one else had noticed. Every channel ran the same shaky videos of people sprinting out of the park, police shouting, sirens in the background. I'd pause every frame I could find, scanning faces even though I already knew Amy had been taken out by paramedics and was still alive. It was like my brain didn't trust that fact unless I kept confirming it. Amy stayed in the hospital longer than she wanted, then got sent home with a list of medications and a schedule full of appointments. The bullet had gone through her shoulder and into her lung, and even after surgery she couldn't move her arm right. For months I drove her to physical therapy, sat in those hard waiting room chairs scrolling my phone, then watched her come out exhausted, holding her arm like it belonged to someone else. She joked and called it her budget shoulder, tried to shrug it off, but sometimes she'd go to lift something heavier than a coffee cup. Her hand would tremble, and she'd just quietly put it back down. Sleep was a mess for her. Any sudden noise and she would duck or flinch before she even registered what it was. Somewhere in that first week, I found out another person I kind of knew had been there too. He was this guy from a co-working space I used sometimes, the type who always had headphones on and nodded hello but never really talked. A mutual acquaintance posted a fundraiser link and wrote that he'd been walking alone near the entrance when a bullet hit his leg and tore through an artery. He almost bled out before EMTs reached him. Seeing his picture next to Amy's on a community member's injured post made everything sharp again. It wasn't just random faces on TV. It was people I'd stood in line for coffee with, people whose names I knew. When the police started releasing more details about the shooter, it didn't make anything easier to understand. He was 23, from another city, with a pile of reports about erratic behavior and untreated mental health issues that never reached the level where anyone could force help on him. According to the articles, he took a bus into Portland that afternoon, walked to the park, and chose the festival because he saw a crowd and almost no security near the gate. That was it. No manifesto, no personal grudge, just a soft target. They picked him up 2 days later at a relative's house. One article used the phrase, "selected the event at random," and I remember just staring at those words until my eyes hurt. My own life started to crack in quieter ways. I couldn't sleep more than a couple hours at a time. My brain kept replaying the whole day like a broken video, editing small choices, leave 10 minutes earlier. Skip that last email. Don't check Instagram before getting in the car. Every version ended with me standing next to Amy at the entrance. Loud sounds made my heart jump into my throat. One night I ended up sitting on my kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, back against the cabinets, waiting for my breathing to slow down. And that was when I finally Googled therapists and booked an appointment. I told myself other people had it worse, and I was being dramatic. But I also knew if I didn't talk to someone, I was going to fall apart. Therapy wasn't some magic fix, but it gave me a place to say the ugliest things out loud. I told her I felt like I had cheated, like there had been some cosmic mistake, and my name should have been on the patient list too. She called it survivor's guilt, and kept reminding me that a traffic jam isn't a reward or a punishment, it's just timing. I heard her, but it didn't stop the feeling that I'd stepped out of the way and let Amy take a hit that could have been mine. The only thing that made me feel even slightly less useless was doing something with all of it. So I signed up to volunteer with a local group that helps victims of violence and their families. It wasn't glamorous. I answered phones, helped people fill out forms, tried to make confusing paperwork less awful. I also shifted my freelance work toward nonprofits and community groups, saying no to some of the random corporate branding jobs that used to pay my rent. It felt small, but at least it was something. Amy and I stayed in each other's lives, but there was a weight to it now that hadn't been there before. We didn't pretend things were fine. Some days we talked about normal stuff like TV shows and stupid client emails. Other days she'd suddenly bring up a tiny detail from that night, like the smell of the food carts or the way the music cut off between shots, and the whole room would feel tight. It was like there was a line drawn straight through our friendship, before the festival and after. We were closer, but also older in a way that didn't match our ages. Sometimes I picture myself back in that traffic jam on the bridge, fingers drumming on the steering wheel, cursing at the sea of brake lights and checking the time every 30 seconds, completely unaware that those 40 minutes were the space between me and a bullet. Before that night, I was the kind of person who panicked about being 5 minutes late, who showed up stupid early to everything and sat in the parking lot scrolling my phone. Now, when something slows me down, I still get irritated like anyone else. But there's this second layer where I think, you have no idea what you might be missing or avoiding right now. And at the same time, there's this twisted knot in my chest, because my delay meant Amy was the one standing at that entrance without me. Logically, I know I didn't cause that man to show up with a gun. Emotionally, it still feels like I dodged something that hit people I care about instead. The festival never came back to that park, and I can't listen to the band that was supposed to headline without hearing Amy's text in my head. Take your time, I'm not going anywhere. I don't pretend traffic jams are some kind of blessing, but I also don't complain about them out loud anymore. I just sit there, hands on the wheel, and remember that one night when being stuck on a bridge is the only reason I'm still here. So, when I was 38, I decided to move to Denver for a fresh start, and found a studio apartment on the first floor of an old house for $850 a month. I was freshly divorced, doing freelance graphic design, and mostly just wanted somewhere cheap where I could sit with my computer and not think too hard about anything. The listing was from this young couple, Ryan and Hannah, maybe around 30, who just bought the house and were renting the lower floor to help cover their mortgage. When they showed me the place, they kept talking about how the house was a long-term project, pointing at walls they wanted to knock out and flooring they wanted to redo, complaining about how tight money was. I didn't really care about any of that. The studio itself looked fine to me. Decent light, a small bathroom, enough room for a bed and a desk, and a separate entrance through a side porch so I didn't have to walk through their space. That separate door was a big plus. I signed a 1-year lease at their kitchen table, and moved in a week later with my desktop, monitor, tablet, and the usual boxes of cables that only make sense to the person who packed them. The first 2 weeks were normal. I set up my workspace, figured out where to put everything, started going to the same coffee shop most mornings so I could get out of the apartment and meet a client or two. At night, I'd walk around the neighborhood trying to figure out which blocks felt safe and where the cheap food was. Whenever I ran into Ryan or Hannah in the yard or driveway, they were friendly in that landlord way, waving, asking if everything was okay down there, joking about how I was their first tenant. Nothing felt strange at that point. Then small things started disappearing. The first time, I opened the fridge looking for a container of leftovers I was sure I'd saved. It just wasn't there. I stood there with the door open too long, trying to remember if I'd eaten it half asleep. A couple of days later, I went for milk, and half the carton was gone. I live alone. I don't drink milk straight, and I knew I hadn't poured that much into coffee. Still, I told myself I was stressed and probably just forgetting things. A few days after that, a pack of cigarettes I'd left on the kitchen counter vanished. I'm not a heavy smoker, so I remember exactly when I buy a pack. I checked my jacket, my backpack, even the trash, thinking I'd tossed them without noticing nothing. That was the first time I got that tight feeling in my chest, like I was missing something obvious. The thing that really stuck with me was my work jacket. I keep one decent jacket for client meetings, so I don't show up looking like a guy who hasn't left his chair in 12 hours. I always hang it in the little closet by the door. One afternoon, I came back from a meeting and saw it draped over the living room couch like someone had tried it on and tossed it there. I just stood in the doorway staring at it, replaying the morning in my head and coming up blank. I'm messy about a lot of things, but that jacket is one of the few I'm careful with. There was no version of the day where I took it out, laid it on the couch, and forgot. That's when I started wondering if Ryan or Hannah were coming in when I was gone. I work from home most days, but every week there are a few hours where I'm at a coffee shop or across town with clients, which means the place is empty. One afternoon after the jacket thing, I left for a cafe for a couple of hours. When I came back, my laptop was sitting open on my desk. I was sure I'd closed it. The screen was black, but the body was warm, like somebody had just used it. That crossed from weird into, this is my entire income, do not touch. I went upstairs and knocked on their door. Hannah answered with a bright smile that faded a little when she saw my face. I asked, as casually as I could, if they'd needed to come into the studio for any reason while I was out. She let out this quick, nervous laugh and said they'd come in once to check the electrical meter, and she'd forgotten to tell me. While she talked, Ryan stood behind her in the doorway with his arms folded, not saying anything, not really looking at me, just past me toward the stairs. His expression was flat, but there was an edge to it, like he was already annoyed I'd brought it up. I told them I understood emergencies, but that I really needed advance notice for any entries. Tried to keep my tone light, even smiled so it wouldn't turn into a fight. Hannah nodded a bunch of times, said, "Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that." And I went back downstairs. On the surface, it was resolved, but I didn't feel good about it. After that, I checked the lock every time I left, and again when I came back. About a week later, I opened my desk drawer to grab cash for a parking meter, and realized the envelope inside was thinner. I keep a small amount of cash there so I don't have to run to an ATM all the time. I just filled it, so I knew what should have been in there. $80 were gone. I counted 3 times, then just sat there staring at the drawer. That was the moment it went from, maybe I'm forgetful, to someone is stealing from me. I didn't go upstairs right away. If I accused them with nothing to show, it would turn into a he said she said thing, and I'd still be the guy living under his landlords. Instead, I ordered a cheap security camera online, one of those little black cubes, and set it on my bookshelf aimed straight at the front door. It had motion detection, so it would start recording whenever anyone walked in. The next day, I packed my laptop and left for the library downtown, forcing myself to stay out for about 4 hours. When I got back, I plugged the camera into my laptop before I even took my shoes off. I scrolled through the files until I found a clip from about an hour after I'd left in the video. My door opened, and Hannah walked in like it was her own place, using a key. She shut the door, looked around, then walked over to my kitchen cabinet, took out a pack of cookies, slipped it into her hoodie pocket, and let herself out again. Seeing that actually made me calmer. It wasn't my memory. It wasn't stress. They had a duplicate key and were just coming in whenever they felt like it. I saved the clip to cloud storage immediately, made a backup, and headed upstairs with my laptop. I knocked and Ryan opened the door this time, already frowning like he knew exactly why I was there. I didn't step in. I just held up my laptop and told him I needed to talk to both of them. Hannah came over from the living room, wiping her hands on her jeans. She already looked stressed, like we were picking up a conversation I hadn't heard. I set the laptop on their kitchen table, hit play, and let the video run without saying anything. We all watched Hannah on the screen unlocking my door, walking straight into my studio, heading to my cabinet and taking my cookies before letting herself back out. When it ended, I paused the frame on her face. I told them this wasn't just about food. I said $80 were missing from my desk drawer, and I wanted an explanation, my money back, and 0 more surprise entries. I tried to keep my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. Hannah started crying immediately, saying she was sorry. She only grabbed the cookies. She never took cash. I looked at Ryan. He blew up. 1 second he was quiet. The next he was in my face, yelling that this was their house, their property, and they had the right to come in for inspections whenever they wanted. He said I should be grateful they rented to me at all. I told him inspections were scheduled and announced, not sneaking in with a key when I was gone. I said I had video proof now. He yelled that I was calling them thieves, that I was trying to get free rent. Hannah sobbed harder and started talking about how they were behind on payments. The bank was on them. They were going to lose the house. I didn't know what to do with that. I understood being broke, but not enough to accept people walking through my stuff. I pulled out my phone and called my friend Eric, who's a lawyer, and put him on speaker so they could hear. I told him exactly what happened. He didn't even pause. He said landlords have to give 24 hours written notice for non-emergency entry, and that inspections didn't mean random drop-ins. Then he said, taking anything from my place, including cash, was theft, a criminal offense, regardless of who owned the building. When he used the word criminal, Ryan stopped yelling. Ryan stood there breathing hard, then took out his wallet. Without looking at me, he counted out $80 and held it out like he was doing me some favor. I took it, ended the call with Eric, and walked back downstairs without saying anything else. As soon as I shut my door, I called a locksmith. I didn't ask permission. The guy came that afternoon, swapped the lock, and I paid the $140 because I just wanted to know the only key was in my pocket. After he left, I sat at my desk and wrote a formal letter saying they'd violated my privacy and stolen from me, and that I wanted out of the lease with no penalty. I attached the video and emailed it so there'd be a record. They wrote back that night refusing to terminate the lease. The email said they'd done nothing illegal, that the video lacked context, and that further accusations would be treated as harassment. A few hours later, I heard them upstairs screaming at each other, stuff slamming into walls, Hannah yelling that she told him it would blow up. I locked my new deadbolt, shoved a chair under the doorknob anyway, and tried to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, someone started pounding on my door. Not knocking, full force pounding. I was already awake. I checked the peephole and saw Ryan swaying in the hallway, clearly drunk. He shouted my name, demanded I open the door, said I'd stolen his money, that the $80 was his. I told him through the wood that I wasn't opening anything, and if he didn't leave, I was calling the police. He kept hitting the door, yelling that it was his house, his rules, that he could kick me out tonight. I set my phone to record, laid it on the table, and dialed 911 loud enough for him to hear. He yelled for another 10 minutes, then stomped back upstairs. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, I called the non-emergency line and 2 officers came by. I showed them the video of Hannah walking in with the key and played the recording of Ryan threatening me. They took notes, took my ID, and finally said that without assault or forced entry, this was mostly a landlord-tenant civil thing. They said at least it was documented if it escalated. That was enough for me. I packed my essentials, computer, drives, clothes, paperwork, and called my friend Nate to ask if I could crash on his couch. He said yes right away. I left the rest of my stuff, locked up, and moved out that day. For 3 weeks, I worked from his dining table and hunted for a new place. Eric drafted another letter, this time full of legal language, saying we'd sue for illegal entry, harassment, and more if they didn't release me. That finally got a response. They agreed to let me out of the lease if I moved my things by the end of the month, but said they were keeping my $1,700 security deposit because I damaged the lock and created a hostile environment. Eric said we could fight it and probably win, but it would take months and hearings and energy I didn't have. I thought about late-night pounding on that door and decided I just wanted it over. I agreed by email, went back once with Nate, grabbed the rest of my stuff while they stayed upstairs, and slid the keys through their mail slot on the way out. About 6 months later, I saw the house online listed as a foreclosure, and instead of feeling happy they lost it. I just thought about how fast trust disappears when someone decides their money problems are more important than basic respect for the person living right under their feet. During the fall of 2019, I was in my first year of grad school, 23 years old. That morning, I had an important meeting with my advisor at 9. One of those, let's talk about your thesis and your future conversations. So I was already stressed when I left my apartment. Campus was usually a 20-minute drive, so I pulled out a little after 8:30, thinking I'd get there 10 minutes early and actually look organized for once. About halfway there, I ran into a dead line of cars on the main road to campus. At first, I thought it was just a long light, but the line barely moved. A few minutes later, I saw construction signs and a crew tearing up one lane, flaggers letting one direction pass at a time. I sat there inching forward, watching the clock crawl toward 9 and doing useless mental math about how late I was going to be. By the time the flagger finally waved my side through, I'd burned something like 15 minutes. Turning around made no sense, so I just pushed the speed a bit and prayed I didn't hit another slowdown. When I finally rolled onto campus, every normal spot near the main building was gone. I ended up on the far student lot I usually avoided, cut the engine, checked my phone, and saw 9:05 glowing back at me. I swore, grabbed my backpack, and started walking fast enough that it was basically a jog. I'd done that walk 100 times. The building with my advisor's office sat in the center of campus, 3 stories of old brick. Normally, around 9, the front steps were crowded. Smokers, people finishing coffee, groups cramming before class. As I got closer, I realized it was completely empty. No one on the benches, no one leaning on the railings, nobody cutting across the lawn. Just the building and this weird open space around it. It bothered me enough that I slowed down and looked around for a second. The windows were lit. I could see a couple of projectors on in first-floor rooms, so it wasn't like the building was closed for the day. I told myself everyone was already inside and went straight to the main doors. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't move. I tried the other door, pulled harder, then pushed with my shoulder. Nothing. The doors were locked. That building was never locked during the day. Official hours were 8 to 6, and I'd walked in early for classes plenty of times. I stood there with my hand on the handle for a few seconds, waiting to notice some taped sheet about maintenance or a fire drill. There was nothing on the glass, just my reflection and the empty steps behind me. A shaky, irritated feeling started to build in my chest. If I couldn't get inside, I couldn't get to my advisor, and now I'd look like I'd just skipped the meeting. I went around to the side entrance I sometimes used when I parked on the other lot. Same thing. Handle dead, no keypad, no sign. I cut across the grass to the door by the auditorium. Locked. I checked another by the loading dock. Locked. Every entrance I knew was shut, like somebody had sealed the place from the outside. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my advisor's number, already rehearsing what I'd say about the roadwork and the locked doors. Right as my thumb hovered over the call button, I heard a sharp crash from the far side of the building. It was loud and clean, not like a dropped bottle, more like a big window giving out. The sound bounced off the brick and made me flinch. I turned toward it and walked around the corner. On the first floor, facing a strip of grass, one of the classroom windows was just gone. Jagged pieces stuck to the frame, the rest scattered on the ground below it. As I was staring at that, a man climbed through the opening and jumped down onto the grass. He was definitely not a student. Mid-30s, scruffy, jeans and a dark jacket. He landed awkwardly, dropped to one knee, then pushed himself up like he didn't feel it. For a moment he just stood there under the broken window, shoulders tight, breathing hard. Then he started looking around, scanning the lawn and the empty paths. His eyes slid across the grass and trees and then locked onto me. I was maybe 30 meters away, half around the corner, just standing there with my phone in my hand. For a second or two, we just stared at each other. He didn't look embarrassed or startled about the broken glass. He just looked locked in on me, like I was suddenly the only thing he cared about. He started walking straight toward me. Not running, but fast, with this stiff, deliberate kind of stride, arms close to his sides. I didn't call out to him or ask what happened. Something in my brain had already decided this wasn't a situation I wanted to be anywhere near. I took a couple of small steps backward without really thinking about it. Then I turned around and headed back the way I'd come, toward the parking lot. At first I tried to keep it to a fast walk, like maybe I was overreacting and this was nothing. After a few seconds I couldn't help it and glanced back over my shoulder. He had sped up. He was almost running now, arms moving, closing the distance between us way faster than I wanted, eyes still fixed on me like I was a target. Any thought that I might just be being paranoid dropped out of my head. My chest tightened. I faced forward again, and I ran. I ran as fast as I could, my backpack smashing into my shoulders with every step. My lungs burned almost immediately, but the thought of him catching me kept my legs moving. The parking lot looked twice as far away as it had when I parked earlier. My keys were already in my hand, digging into my palm while I sprinted toward my car. Every few seconds I glanced back over my shoulder to see if he was still coming. He was, not yelling, not asking anything, just locked on me and running hard. That blank focus scared me more than any screaming would have. I cut between parked cars instead of staying on the lane, trying to shave off distance. I hit the unlock button on the fob while I was still several spaces away. For one awful second nothing happened, and my stomach dropped. Then I heard the soft click of the locks and almost sagged with relief. I yanked the door open, dropped into the driver's seat, slammed it, and hit the lock button again. Only then did I twist around and look out the rear window. He was maybe 20 meters away now, slowing down once he saw me in the car. He stopped between two cars and just stared straight at me through the glass. We looked at each other for a few seconds, his chest heaving, his face weirdly blank. Then he turned around and ran back in the direction of the main building. I sat there frozen for a moment, listening to my breathing and the faint ticking from the dashboard. Then I started the engine, mostly so I could move if I suddenly needed to. While it idled, I grabbed my phone from the seat and finally checked the screen. There were missed calls from my advisor, a campus number, and a pile of messages in the university group chat. I opened the group chat first. At the top was an emergency alert from campus security saying the campus was in lockdown because of an armed person. Everyone inside was told to stay put, lock doors, stay away from windows. Everyone else was told to stay away. Seeing the words armed person while I sat alone in my car made my hands start shaking again. I read the alert twice and thought about the broken window and the way he had run straight at me. It didn't feel like a stretch to connect those things. I tapped my advisor's name, and he answered almost right away, sounding tense and short of breath. Before he could finish asking where I was, I said I had just arrived, missed the alert, and watched a man jump out of a window and chase me to the lot. He went quiet for a second, then told me to stay in the car with the doors locked and not drive back toward any building. He said police were already on campus looking for a man who had gone into a classroom that morning, threatened a professor, and demanded money. After that, the man had disappeared somewhere in the building, which was why everything was locked down. My advisor asked for a description of the guy who chased me. I told him mid-30s, average build, jeans, dark jacket, short dark hair, no bag, nothing obvious in his hands. He said that matched what they already knew, and that he would pass it to the officers. I drove off, waited nearby, later read he'd been arrested, a fired admin blackmailing his boss, and realized traffic probably saved me. I had been going to Riverside Aquatic Center on Tuesday and Thursday evenings after work for about a year at that point. Swimming was how I reset after long days of code and meetings. I'd leave the office around 7, and by 8 I'd be in the water, when the families and kids were gone and I could move at my own pace. That Thursday, the 3rd of November, started the same. I checked Slack one last time in the locker room, changed into my one piece, shoved my phone into my bag, and walked out onto the pool deck. On the end lane, closest to the wall, a guy stood in the shallow water. Swim trunks, t-shirt, a GoPro on a pole. I figured he was going to film his stroke. Lane 4 was free, so I slid in and started freestyle. I focused on counting breaths instead of thinking about work. About 15 minutes later, I hit the wall, turned, and when I came up for air, I realized he wasn't on the end lane anymore. He'd moved into lane 3, right next to me. He stood in chest-deep water, holding the pole so the GoPro pointed straight across, into my lane. The red recording light flashing every time I turned my head to breathe. I tried to ignore it, finished one more length, then stopped in the middle of the lane and looked at him. He kept the camera on me like I wasn't even there. My stomach dropped. I remember feeling suddenly very small and exposed. I swam to the ladder, climbed out, wrapped my towel around my hips, and walked over to him. "Are you filming me?" I asked. As soon as I got close, he dipped the GoPro under the water. He smiled and said, No, I'm filming my swim. Just testing a new camera." "You haven't swum once," I said. "You've just been standing there pointing it at me." He shrugged. "It's allowed. It's just training footage." The way he said allowed made my skin crawl. I told him to point the camera somewhere else or stop recording, then turned away before he could answer, because my hands had started to shake. I walked to the lifeguard stand, still dripping. The guard on duty was a skinny guy, maybe 20. I told him what happened, the lane change, the camera, the light, the way the guy refused to move it. The guard nodded, glanced over at the lanes and said, "Yeah, I'll talk to him," in a flat voice. He wasn't security. I decided I was done anyway. I went back to the locker room, took a quick shower, changed into jeans and a hoodie, and shoved my wet swimsuit into my bag. Sitting on the bench, I noticed my hands were still shaking. It felt like I'd already been seen without my permission, even though I'd been covered the whole time. Around 9, I walked out through the lobby. The cafe gate was down. The front desk attendant was on her phone, and outside the glass doors, the parking lot was mostly dark. Some lights were out, so there were shadows between the cars. My car was in the far row because I'd been late. I slung my bag across my shoulder, wrapped my fingers around my keys so one stuck out between my knuckles, and headed toward it at a quick walk. The only sounds were my footsteps and the hum of traffic. I scanned the lot, but didn't see anyone. I reached my car, unlocked it, and opened the driver's door. That's when a male voice behind me said, "Hey, wait a second." I turned and saw him. The same guy from the pool, now in jeans and a dark hoodie, walking between the rows of cars. He was closer than I liked, closing the distance with a quick, focused walk, eyes fixed on me and my open door. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just kept coming straight toward my car. And in that moment, it hit me that he hadn't just happened to leave at the same time as I did. He'd come out after me on purpose. I dropped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and hit the lock without thinking. My hands were shaking so much I fumbled the keys twice before I got them into the ignition and started the engine. By the time the dashboard lights came on, he was at my window, knocking on the glass with his knuckles. Like this was some normal conversation. I kept the window up. For a second I stared straight ahead, hoping he'd get bored and walk away. But he didn't. I forced myself to look at him. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it over the engine. He leaned down so his face was level with mine and raised his voice just enough for it to carry through the glass. "I just wanted to apologize if I scared you," he said. He gave me this big, friendly smile that never reached his eyes. "We could talk about it over coffee or something. Clear things up." His eyes were flat and focused in a way that didn't match the smile at all. I shook my head hard and didn't answer. I shifted into drive, pressed my foot on the gas, and the car jerked forward. He had to jump back to get out of the way, his hand sliding off the window as I pulled away. At the end of the row, I checked the mirror. He was still standing between the cars, turned toward me, watching the taillights. One hand hung by his side, holding his phone. I couldn't tell if he'd been filming or just had it ready. Not knowing made my stomach twist. The drive home usually took 20 minutes. That night it felt like an hour. I kept checking the mirrors, counting how long each pair of headlights stayed behind me. If a car sat there too long, I changed lanes or took an extra turn just to see if it followed. None of them did, but my body stayed wired like I was being hunted the whole way. At my apartment complex, I parked as close to my building as I could and walked fast to the entrance with my keys already in my hand. Inside, I locked the door, checked it again, then went straight for my laptop. I hadn't seen him actually post anything, but the first thing my brain went to was, if he filmed me, it's probably online already. I opened every social app I had and started searching. My name, tags, location check-ins, the pool's name, the day, the time, nothing. No new photos of me, no videos that looked like me in the background. My accounts were private, but I checked them 3 times anyway. Then I searched public posts that tagged Riverside and scrolled back way further than I needed to. Still nothing. The fear didn't go away just because there wasn't proof. It changed shape. I lay in bed and pictured him scrolling through GoPro footage and phone videos, pausing on frames where I was the only one in shot. I kept thinking about my license plate, my car, how many times he might have seen me walk in and out of that building without me ever noticing him. The next day at work, I was basically useless. I sat through stand-ups and tried to review pull requests, but my brain kept looping the same questions. Did he see my plate? Had he followed me before? Did he already know which direction I drove home? Every Slack notification made me jump. By Tuesday evening, I was supposed to grab my swim bag and head back to Riverside like nothing had happened. I stared at the bag under my desk and felt my chest tighten. There was no way I was walking back into that place knowing that guy might wander in again, and that the only person I'd told, the lifeguard, hadn't really cared. After work, instead of driving to the pool, I drove home, opened my laptop, and searched for other pools in the city. I filtered for places with more people, more staff, anything that suggested actual security. One big center downtown on Oak Street kept coming up. The photos were crowded, and their site mentioned on-site security and cameras in public areas. I signed up for a membership that same night. The first 3 weeks at the new pool, I swam like I was still being watched. Every time I went into the locker room, I checked corners, vents, and the gaps in the doors. On the deck, I did a full scan before I got in the water, noting who had their phone out and who had any kind of camera. Any man who even vaguely looked like him made my hands tighten around my goggles until he moved away. About a month later, a woman I used to see at Riverside messaged me. We weren't close, just people who nodded and shared a lane sometimes, but she'd noticed I'd vanished. She asked if I'd switched pools, or if something had happened. I hesitated, then told her about the guy with the GoPro and how he'd followed me to my car. I tried to keep it simple so I wouldn't talk myself out of it. She replied almost immediately that she knew exactly who I meant. His name was Brad. A month earlier, she said, the staff at Riverside had caught him recording women in the locker room through a gap in the door. He'd hidden a camera in his backpack and angled it toward the changing area. Someone noticed, called the manager, and they called the police. But by the time officers arrived, he'd already deleted everything. Because there was no footage left, they didn't charge him with anything. They only banned him from every pool in that chain across the state. I sat there on my couch, reading those messages over and over, hands shaking again. That night with the GoPro hadn't been some awkward misunderstanding. It was just the time I happened to see what he was doing. I still go to the pool on Oak Street because I refuse to give up something that helps me feel human. But I never walk in relaxed, and every time I check the locker room for hidden lenses or see someone pull out a camera near the water, I'm reminded that guys like him don't look like monsters. They just look like another swimmer who decided you don't get a say in who's watching you. I've been working as a security guard at Galloway Mall for 6 years now, and I thought I knew every face in that place. I had my whole routine down to muscle memory at that point. That Thursday, I was on the normal noon to 8 shift, already thinking about what show I'd watch with my kids that night, when my phone buzzed at breakfast. It was Trent, my night partner, sounding like death on speaker, saying he'd been throwing up all morning and begging me to cover his 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. I hesitated for maybe 3 seconds, then remembered the quote the mechanic gave me for the car repair. Extra cash, plus the overtime bonus, so I told Trent I'd do it, and to get some rest. As soon as I hung up, I texted my wife Karen that I'd be home crazy late. She replied almost right away, said she'd leave dinner in the fridge, and to please not live on vending machine chips all night. The daytime part of the shift was the usual slow grind. I walked loops, checked delivery IDs at the loading dock, asked one guy to move his truck because he was blocking the fire lane, broke up some loud teenagers in the food court, and filled out a short incident report when 2 guys yelled at each other in front of the shoe store. Nothing serious. By late afternoon, my feet hurt and my back ached, but that's just what the job is. Around 8, the public started thinning out, store gates rattled down, the music shut off, cleaning crew rolled their carts out from storage. Pretty soon it was just staff, janitors, a few people in the 24-hour supermarket on the first floor, and whoever had tickets for the last movie on the 4th. I switched my brain into night shift mode, grabbed my bigger flashlight and started the slower rounds, checking every gate, tugging on the pharmacy door, opening utility rooms to make sure no one had slipped into sleep, scanning the darker corners where kids sometimes tried to hide and vape. Time moved different once the background noise died. I'd walk, stop, listen, then keep going. Stairwells, service corridors, the dim hallway behind the food court, up to the quiet third floor where most of the clothing stores are. I wasn't thinking about much, honestly. Just counting hours and doing the checklist in the back of my head. Then, a little after 10, a sharp, clean crash snapped through the empty air from the second floor. It was glass. Not a little clink, but a full break. My stomach dropped and my body just started running before my brain caught up. I hit the escalator 2 steps at a time, radio in one hand, thumb on the emergency button, the other hand hovering over my pepper spray. As soon as I cleared the top, I swung the flashlight toward the sound. Gemstone Jewelry's front display window was smashed wide open, glass glittering all over the tile. Inside, 2 figures in dark clothes and balaclavas were bent over the cases, sweeping handfuls of merchandise into bags like they'd practiced it. I slapped the panic button on my radio, felt the little click, and yelled, "Freeze! Security! Hands up!" My voice sounded louder than I meant it to in the empty mall. Both of them jerked their heads toward me. The one closest to the back grabbed a bag and sprinted toward the service exit without even looking twice. The other one turned fully toward me and just stood there, breathing hard. My flashlight hit his face. The mask covered everything but his eyes, but those were enough light brown, a little narrow, with this half-tired, half-annoyed look. I had this instant, annoying feeling like I'd seen them 100 times and never paid attention. He lifted his hands slowly. "Easy, man," he said through the fabric. "We're leaving. Nobody gets hurt." Normal voice. Local. The way guys talk to me when they joke at the food court. I stayed by the broken window instead of charging in like an idiot, keeping space so I had room to move if he rushed me. "Take off the mask and get on the floor," I told him. "Police are already coming." He shook his head once, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. That little anxious bounce made something itch in the back of my mind, like I'd watched that exact nervous habit before. My radio crackled on my shoulder. "Unit 3, confirmed situation, backup en route." I brought it up without taking my eyes off him. 2 masked suspects, Gemstone Jewelry, 2nd floor, I said. 1 fled into the rear service corridor. 2nd still on scene. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The robber flinched when he heard me say, 2nd still on scene, like he suddenly realized how bad this could get for him if he stayed. For a second he froze, then I heard a faint buzzing from his pocket. He glanced down, reflexive, and his hand went toward it. "Hands where I can see them!" I shouted, stepping in half a pace. Instead of stopping, he yanked the phone out just enough to look at the screen. My light followed the movement and hit his wrist. That's when I saw the bracelet. Thick leather band, metal studs all the way around. My brain started flipping through the whole day and fast forward. Delivery drivers, the older lady who always complains about the air conditioning, the movie theater kids, the janitors, the electronics store crew on the 3rd floor, and then it landed exactly where it needed to. Trevor. Mid-20s, lean guy, works at the electronics store, always talking about basketball scores and phone releases. Earlier that afternoon, I'd walked past his doorway and noticed that same bracelet when he crossed his arms, metal catching the light. Now that I had the name in my head, everything lined up too neatly to ignore same height, same shoulders, same quick little bounce on the balls of his feet. My mouth felt dry. I heard myself say, "Quieter. Trevor?" Like I was asking both of us. He went rigid. Even with the mask on, I could tell he recognized his own name. For maybe half a second we just stared at each other through the beam of my flashlight. Then he spun around and bolted toward the back of the store, phone still in his hand, bag swinging at his side. I jumped through the broken window and chased him, yelling for him to stop, but he was younger, faster, and knew every hallway I did. He slipped through the rear door into the service corridor, cut left, and by the time I hit the doorway, he was already just echoing footsteps and moving shadows. I followed as far as I dared, but when I reached a three-way junction with nothing but dark concrete ahead, I stopped. Going deeper alone after a desperate guy who might be armed didn't seem brave. It seemed stupid. I backed out to the main hallway, breathing hard, and stayed there with my radio in my hand until the police showed up a few minutes later, blue lights washing over the mall entrance. When they came in, I walked them through everything in order, showed them the smashed window, the route the first robber took out the back, the service door where Trevor vanished, and I told them about the bracelet and said I suspected Trevor Coleman from the electronics store detectives came back the next afternoon to go over my statement again. I told them the same thing I'd told the uniforms, every step from hearing the glass to losing him in the corridor. When I brought up Trevor by name, the older detective Harper asked if I was sure and not just guessing. I told him I recognized the eyes, the way he moved, and that bracelet on his wrist. Harper wrote it down, said they'd check it, and left. The next day, he pulled me into the security office and went over what they'd found. Trevor had finished his shift at 8, clocked out, and walked out the main exit like any other night. At 8:15, the outside camera showed him getting into his car and driving off the lot. Harper just said, "Looks normal to me, nothing sneaky there." Hearing that didn't make me feel any better. Then he told me they'd checked Trevor's phone and location data. According to the records, his phone stayed at his apartment all night, GPS pinned to the same address with no gaps. Neighbors said they'd heard his TV around 9, some game on, nothing strange. They still went to his place that evening. Trevor opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair messy, like he'd been sleeping. He let them in, answered their questions, said he'd come home after work, eaten, watched the game, and crashed on the couch. He told them he hadn't left the apartment once Harper said he seemed calm and surprised, not angry, not scared. The bracelet wasn't on his wrist, and they didn't find it anywhere in the place. When I heard that, I asked Harper what Trevor said about it. He told me Trevor claimed he'd lost the bracelet a week earlier and stopped wearing it. I told Harper that was impossible, because I'd seen it on Trevor's wrist that same afternoon. He just looked tired and said, "We have your word and nothing else." The cameras only showed the robbers from behind, hoods up, masks on, and they'd worn gloves, so there were no prints we could use. A week later, Trevor handed in his notice. My supervisor said Trevor didn't want to keep working in a place where people looked at him like a criminal. Some of the clerks told me he was moving to another city to live with a cousin and start over. After that, he just stopped showing up. No goodbye, no last talk, just gone. The case got closed for lack of evidence, written off like any other unsolved theft. The jewelry store lost about $40,000 in stock and moved on. I didn't really move on. I kept saying I'd seen his bracelet, his eyes, the way he shifted his weight, and I knew it was him. People listened, but you could tell they didn't believe me anymore. Even Karen said it was dark, I was stressed, and maybe I'd mixed him up with someone who just looked similar. 2 years have passed since that night, and I still walk the same halls, past the space where his store used to be, wondering if I ruined an innocent man's name or watched a thief walk away clean. The thing that sticks with me is how perfect his alibi looked. Phone and GPS showing him home while he could have been anywhere detectives called it clean, while saying the crew were professionals with other hits. I see that bracelet and hear his voice. I'll never know for sure, and that's the worst part of it all. When I was 36, I worked as a night desk clerk at a small motel off the highway in Nevada. I'm 42 now, my name is Valeri, and that job feels like it happened to someone else. It was 2018. I was mid-divorce, broke, grabbing overnight shifts to barely survive. Most nights were slow in a way that makes you careless truckers. The odd family that took the wrong exit, a drunk couple arguing in the lot. I sat behind the desk with bad coffee, halfway reading paperbacks, halfway watching old movies on my laptop. The place was tiny, 20 rooms and an L around the parking lot, with the office at the corner so I could see every door and most of the cars without leaving my chair. During training, my manager hammered the after-midnight rules into me. Strange people sometimes came asking for keys to rooms they hadn't booked, or wanting info on guests. "You are not their friend," he said. "You're a locked window and a phone. No arguments. Call police." I believed him at first. By the third month, I honestly stopped expecting anything bad. You tell yourself the scary stories happened to some other clerk. That night in early March was colder than usual, wind shaking the door. The lot was quiet. 2 semis, a pickup, 1 gray sedan. All of them already occupied around 2 in the morning. Headlights swept across the office and an old white van turned in. It was filthy, dented, and missing a front plate. 3 men got out. 2 were young, hoodies up, hands in pockets. The third was older, leather jacket, heavier build. He watched everything, silent. They came straight to the window slot. The older one leaned in and said they needed 1 room with 2 beds for the night. I grabbed a registration card, asked for ID. While I wrote, the younger 2 circled the office, peeking in windows, one testing the door from outside. It rattled under his hand and stayed shut. "It's locked," I called. One of them asked, "Why is it locked?" I said, "Policy, safety." The older man didn't react, just watched my hands. He paid cash, took the key for room 14, then went back to the van with them. I watched them open the rear doors and haul out 2 big duffel bags and a backpack before they finally went into 14 and closed the door. Maybe 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on the glass, and one of the younger guys was standing there again alone. He said they needed more towels. That was normal enough. I grabbed 3 from the shelf and slid them through the slot. He just stared at me instead of leaving. I finally asked, "Anything else?" He smiled a little and said, "You here alone tonight?" My hand tightened on nothing. I could feel my heartbeat pick up. I forced a shrug and said, "No. Our security guard is doing rounds." There was no guard, just me and broken cameras. He smirked like he knew, took the towels, and walked back toward 14 without saying another word. I watched their door. As soon as he vanished, the little warning feeling in my gut turned into something solid. I picked up the phone and called the local police station, not 911, because it still felt like maybe I was overreacting. I explained about the van, no plate, their questions, the door testing. The dispatcher sounded tired, but she did not brush me off. She repeated everything back, asked me to confirm room 14, and said she'd send a patrol unit to swing through the lot. Then she added there'd been a wreck on the highway, so it could take about an hour. Time dragged after that. Every sound from the lot made my shoulders jump. Around 3 in the morning, I was stretching behind the desk when I heard a scream outside. A woman's scream, high and short, cut off fast. My chair crashed over as I rushed to the window front. I could see room 14's light glowing, curtains pulled tight so I had nothing to look at but fabric. My hands shook dialing the station again. I told the same dispatcher I'd heard a woman scream near 14. She said the patrol car was already coming, about 15 minutes out. After I hung up with the dispatcher, my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I remember wiping my palms on my jeans and realizing they were actually damp. I kept looking at the clock, then at the office door, then out toward room 14. Those 15 minutes suddenly felt very long. I decided I didn't want to be standing out in full view if those guys came back to the window. I went to the inner office door, the one that led into the tiny back room, and slid the deadbolt into place. That door was solid. It was the only thing in that building that felt sturdy. Then I went around and turned off the lobby lights, even the little lamp by the computer, so I wasn't lit up like a target. The only light left came from the monitor and the motel sign outside. I crouched behind the front counter and watched through the metal window slot we used at night. From there, I could see the line of doors along the L, and I just stared at the one for 14. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The lot looked completely still. No cars moving, no doors opening. Then the door to 14 swung open. Those same 3 men came out. The older one and one of the younger guys were carrying something big, wrapped tight in one of our tan motel blankets. One had the top, the other had the bottom. It was long, heavy-looking, and they had to adjust their grip as they moved. The second young guy walked a few steps ahead, turning his head like he was checking the lot. They went straight to the white van. Someone slid the side door open, and they lifted the wrapped thing inside with effort, like they were trying not to drop it. The older man climbed halfway into the van, pulled it farther back, then jumped down. One of the younger ones jogged back into the room, came out with the same bags and backpack I'd watched them unload earlier, and tossed everything into the van. He slammed the doors. None of them looked toward the office. Not once. The engine started and they reversed out of the space fast, then shot toward the exit. It was way too fast for a normal motel checkout in the middle of the night. I listened to the sound of the van heading toward the highway and made myself stay behind the counter until I could not hear it anymore. I thought about calling the dispatcher back, but they were already sending a car, and I didn't know what else I could add besides, "They left." Maybe 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across the walls. A patrol car rolled into the lot and stopped right in front of the office. 2 officers got out, one older, one younger. I flipped the lobby lights back on, unlocked the outer door, and let them inside. As soon as I started talking, my voice shook. I told them everything, step by step. The check-in, the guy asking if I was alone, the scream, the bundle, the towels, the van leaving. They didn't tell me I was overreacting. The older officer just kept writing and asked which room. We walked down to 14 together. He tried the handle and turned to me. "Doors locked from inside," he said. He radioed that in, then stepped back while the younger officer kicked the door next to the knob. It took 2 kicks before it flew open. Even from the walkway, I could smell bleach. They went in first. I stopped in the doorway and stayed there. The carpet inside was damp, like it had just been mopped. The older officer checked the bed and said 1 blanket and most of the bedding were missing. The younger one went into the bathroom, then called him over. From the hall, I could see the tub, still wet, and the shower curtain pushed aside. Around the drain, there was something dark the bleach hadn't taken completely. They told me to go back to the office and wait. A little while later, they came in and said there were what looked like blood traces in and around the shower drain and on some of the grout, and that they'd called crime scene and detectives. I stayed there until morning, giving my statement over and over. The next day, detectives had me come down to the station. They walked me through the whole night again, asked me to repeat what each man looked like, what they said, where they stood. Then they came by the motel and asked for the security footage. That was when my boss finally admitted the cameras hadn't worked in almost a year because he didn't want to pay to fix them. One of the detectives just stared at him for a second and wrote something down. They found the van about a week later in another state, abandoned behind some closed stores. They matched it by the partial plate I'd written down, and the description inside, in the back, they found dried blood. Later, they told me DNA showed it belonged to a young woman who had been reported missing from a neighboring town. Right around that time, she'd gone out one evening and just never come home. They never found her body. They never found the 3 men either. The driver's license the older guy handed me that night turned out to be completely fake. The numbers didn't match any real record. For a while, the detectives kept me updated, but every call was the same. They were following leads, nothing solid yet. After a few months, the calls stopped. I quit the motel the day after that second interview with the detectives. I finished my shift, turned in my keys, and promised myself I'd never work nights again. Now I have a boring office job with normal hours, and I still can't stand being the only person in a building after dark. I think about that night a lot and replay every choice I made, wondering if I should have called sooner or pushed harder. But I also know that if I'd tried to confront those men or gone near that room, there's a good chance I wouldn't be here telling this at all, and that is something I just have to live with. It happened last summer when I was back in my hometown for a couple weeks. I was 22, home from college in another state, doing the usual rotation of free food at my parents' place and staring at the same streets I'd grown up on. After a few days, I got tired of listening to my dad ask about internships, so I started scrolling through old contacts and saw my childhood friend Tyler pop up. We hadn't seen each other in about 3 years. We did that thing where we kept saying, "We should hang out when you're in town," and then never actually did. I messaged him, he called within minutes, and it felt weirdly normal hearing his voice again. He said he was renting an apartment in our old neighborhood, same part of town where we used to ride our bikes around until the streetlights came on. He told me to come by Friday night, said we'd catch up like actual adults, which for us meant beer and cheap food. I drove over around 8. The house was one of those old 2-story wooden ones you see all over that area, porch sagging a little, paint tired but still hanging on. Tyler had the first floor, and some older lady rented the second. He opened the door before I even knocked, pulled me into a quick hug, then stepped back and went, "Dude, you look exactly the same." Which was a lie, but whatever inside was small but fine. Couch, TV, tiny kitchen, way too many energy drink cans on the counter. We ordered pizza, grabbed some beer from a corner store around the block, and spent the night talking trash about teachers, classmates, jobs, all of it. He told me he was working at a warehouse, thinking about going back to school, maybe next year. I told him about my classes and how broke I was. Some loud action movie was on. We were half watching and half ignoring it. It honestly felt good, like stepping into a version of my life where I hadn't moved away yet. Around midnight, I checked the time and said I should probably head back across town. Tyler shook his head and said, "It's late, man. Just crash here." Couch pulls out. "Your mom still thinks I'm a good influence, right?" He wasn't wrong about the first part. I was tired and had a couple of beers in me. Driving all the way back to my parents' place, dealing with my dad making a joke about late nights, sounded annoying, so I said sure. I texted my mom I was staying at a friend's, got back a quick, "Okay," and that was that. Tyler pulled out the couch bed in the living room. The mattress was thin and lumpy, but it beat the driver's seat of my car. He dug some sheets and a blanket out of the hall closet, tossed me a pillow, apologized that everything smelled like the closet it came from. I made the bed while he yawned his way down the short hallway toward his room. "Bathroom's the first door," he said. "If you hear anything weird, it's just Mrs. Collins upstairs. She's like 70 and never sleeps." Then he shut his door. I lay there for a while on my phone, scrolling through social media, answering a couple messages from college friends asking how it was being back in the middle of nowhere. After 20 minutes or so, my eyes felt heavy, so I plugged the phone in on the coffee table, turned off the lamp, and settled under the blanket. It was a little stuffy even with the window cracked. The house had that old building feel, where every small sound is louder than it should be. I couldn't fall asleep right away. New place, different noises. I could hear the fridge humming, a car passing outside every now and then, some dog barking far away. I just lay there with my eyes closed, trying to relax, telling myself to stop thinking about random stuff and just sleep. That's when I heard a dull thud. Not crazy loud, but solid, like something heavy falling over. My eyes opened on reflex. For a second, I couldn't tell where it came from. It sounded like either the kitchen or somewhere directly above it. Like on the second floor, I held my breath and listened. Nothing. No running water, no voices, no follow-up sound. I figured the lady upstairs had dropped something. It made sense. The ceilings were thin. I told myself that and closed my eyes again. A few more minutes went by. I was drifting right on that edge of sleep when I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps above me, crossing the ceiling over the living room. The boards creaked with each step in that long, dragging way old floors do. They went from one side of the ceiling to the other, paused, then went back the way they came. I remembered Tyler saying some older woman lived upstairs alone, Mrs. Collins' 70s, he'd said. These footsteps didn't sound like a small, careful old lady walk. They were heavier, like someone bigger putting their weight down each time. Not stomping, just solid. I lay perfectly still, staring up in the dark, counting the passes across the room. It went on like that for what felt like 5 minutes. Back and forth, back and forth. Then they stopped. The quiet after that felt even louder. I stayed on my back, waiting, half expecting the footsteps to start again. When they didn't, I tried to let it go. People move around in their own homes. That's not a crime. My breathing smoothed out, my shoulders relaxed a little, and I could feel myself finally starting to slip toward real sleep. Then there was another sound. Different this time. A slow, long creak from somewhere behind me, down the short hallway that led to the back of the apartment. It was close. Same floor, not upstairs. It sounded exactly like a stiff door hinge turning. My whole body went tight. I snapped my eyes open and pushed myself up on one elbow without even thinking about it. The living room was still dark, just this faint orange glow leaking in around the curtains from the streetlight outside. I turned my head toward the kitchen. From there, the narrow hallway ran straight back to where the back door was. That hallway was just a strip of black. I couldn't see the actual door, just the outline of the walls disappearing into the dark. I stayed there propped up, staring at that darkness, trying to decide if I'd really heard the door or just another random noise in an old house. I thought about calling Tyler's name, but the idea of waking him up over nothing made me hesitate. And there was this other thought too, that if someone really had come in, yelling might make things worse. So I just waited, listening hard, watching that hallway, and trying not to move or even breathe too loud. The hallway was dark, and I couldn't see anything there. I stood up from the couch and moved on my toes toward the light switch on the wall, trying not to make any extra noise. My fingers found it, and I flipped it on the living room filled with weak yellow light, and the hallway that led to the back door came into view a lot better. Nothing moved. Nothing jumped out. It was just that narrow stretch of wall and shadow. I walked slowly toward it anyway, feeling stupid, but also like not checking would be worse. When I reached the corner and looked down the hall, I finally saw what had made that sound. The back door was cracked open maybe a couple inches, just enough that I could see a slice of the dark outside. It wasn't wide, but it was definitely not closed. I remembered very clearly watching Tyler slide the bolt over earlier that night when we'd gone out to grab the beer. He'd even rattled it once, like a habit. Seeing it open now made my stomach drop a little. I stepped closer, keeping one hand on the wall out of habit more than anything, and pushed the door shut with my shoulder. The night air coming from outside felt cooler than the stuffy room. The bolt was halfway across, not fully seated. I slid it all the way until it clicked into place firmly, then checked the handle just to be sure. For a few seconds I just stood there, listening. No voices, no movement in the yard, nothing scraping or rustling. It was dead quiet back there. After a moment I turned and walked back down the hallway, my mind already arguing with itself about whether I was overreacting or not. In the living room I hesitated, then went straight to Tyler's bedroom door. I knocked lightly at first, not wanting to freak him out. No answer. I waited, then knocked again, harder this time, and said his name. A few seconds later I heard movement, then the door opened a crack and Tyler's sleepy face appeared. He was in boxers, hair a mess, blinking at the light. "What's up?" he mumbled, voice rough. I told him, in order, about the loud thud above me, the footsteps going back and forth, then the door hinge sound and finding the back door open. While I talked, he woke up more, his eyebrows pulling together. "That back door is weird," he said after a second. He pulled the door open the rest of the way and leaned on the frame. "The lock's old. Sometimes if you don't slide the bolt just right, it'll kind of drift open a bit. Draft or whatever. I thought I closed it all the way though." The frown stayed on his face when he said that. We walked through the apartment together, not in a dramatic way, just methodical. First the kitchen window, then the small one over the sink, then the living room window by the couch. All of them were shut and latched. We checked the front door too. The deadbolt was turned, chain set. Tyler gave it a tug to show it was solid. Nobody had come through there. He shrugged and said it still had to be the back door not catching right. "Old house crap," he said. "You hear a ton of things in this place. Mrs. Collins moves around at night, pipes bang, floor pops. All that I swear it sounds worse when you're sleeping out here instead of in the bedroom." He wasn't brushing me off exactly, just trying to make it sound normal. He suggested we go back to sleep and deal with it in the morning if anything still felt off. That sounded reasonable. Nothing was obviously wrong, and I didn't really want to be the paranoid friend forcing him to call the cops over an unlatched door. I agreed, even though a tight feeling stayed in my chest. Tyler headed back to his room, closing the door most of the way, and I went back to the pull-out couch. I lay down again and pulled the blanket over myself, but any hint of sleepiness I'd had was gone. My eyes kept going from the ceiling to the hallway and back. I told myself over and over that we'd checked everything, that if someone had tried to come in, we would have heard more than one creak, time stretched. I checked my phone at one point and saw that at least 30 minutes had gone by. Right around then, the footsteps upstairs started again. Same slow rhythm, same steady pace, crossing above the living room and then stopping. They were softer this time, or maybe I was just getting used to them, but they were still too heavy to match the picture I had in my head of some fragile 70-year-old woman. I stayed completely still and listened until they faded. After that, the whole place settled into silence. Nothing else happened. No more doors, no more strange bangs. Just silence and the occasional car outside. Eventually, the fear got edged out by exhaustion. My thoughts blurred, and at some point near dawn I slipped under without meaning to. It wasn't good sleep. It felt shallow and jumpy, but it was still sleep. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the faint clatter of dishes. Light was coming around the sides of the curtains now. My neck hurt from the thin mattress. Tyler was in the kitchen in a t-shirt and sweats, moving around the stove like it was just any normal morning. He looked over, grinned a little and said, "Morning, man. You look like crap." I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, then joined him at the small table. While we ate eggs and toast, I told him that I'd heard the footsteps again after we'd gone back to bed. He nodded like it proved his point. "Yeah, that's just Mrs. Collins," he said. "She hardly sleeps. Walks around all the time. First week I lived here, I thought someone was breaking in every night. Now I don't even notice." Even with him saying that, something about the whole night stuck with me. It didn't feel like just old house noise. After breakfast, I thanked him for letting me crash and grabbed my stuff. He joked that next time I should bring earplugs. I drove back to my parents' place and didn't stay over at his again, even though we kept hanging out during the rest of my break. A couple months later, he told me he'd moved to a small studio closer to his job. He said it was mostly because of the commute, but he never really talked about that old place again, and I've always suspected that night wasn't the only strange one he had there.